Not much of a fortress.
Fortress.
What with? Barricades? Not much of a fortress. Gandalf would not approve.
Call that a fortress? Doesn't even have a depot.
What's in our ground? What is it you've been sent to steal from us?
Oh yeah, you're on your ground.
Oh, if only Cyril had the lightning-quick wit you had, Anakin.
It's pointless, old man. You can't beat Cyril in a fair fight. Regroup.
What I want's a comfortable ride home.
Get this man a cushion.
Use the chain of command. I'm the trigger supervisor. You're the finger.
What a horrible analogy.
I'm the finger.
You're more 4 fingers, a thumb, a palm, and a bit of forearm.
And that's how I pull the trigger.
Things work out for you. Rebellions are built on hope.
Do you reckon he remembered that? And that's why he said it to Jin?
Qui-Gon Jinn Erso. There's a good chance, yes.
So his best wisdom came from the bellboy.
Don't be so quick to dismiss the bellboys, my young Padawan. It's the bellboys who carry the greatest burden of us all.
Our suitcases.
Ah, the suitcase of life.
What?
The galaxy
We should have done that during Order 66.
We are the Jedi. The galaxy is watching. We are the Jedi.
Hopefully these guys will avoid our fate.
We are
Nah.
the Jedi.
Empires are built on hope.
The galaxy is watching. We are the Jedi. Some of us are dead and ghosts. The galaxy is watching. Cheer up, love. It might not happen.
What might not happen?
Whatever bad thing she's
I
imagining.
think it's the idea of the bad thing not happening that is making her unhappy. Somebody likes you.
That droid's got a bit of personality.
If this goes south, the stormtroopers will have to open fire on a trapped mass of people.
Do you think stormtroopers will be able to shoot fish in a barrel?
Surely.
Stay with captain. Have to go find my friend.
Wilmot just creates lifelong bonds with chicks wherever he goes, doesn't he? Is he even part of the rebellion? Or just a player?
There's nothing wrong with telling a chick that you're taking their son away and you'll come back to them, and then just not.
Hey.
A girl in every port. It's part of the code. And the kid's clearly got a thing for blondes.
That's not part of the Jedi Code. And he's a rebel.
The Qui Code. The code for players.
Within the crowd.
Was that not my order?
They're green, sir. They're useless. Stand to!
The commander just announced that they're green and useless, clearly in earshot.
Can't imagine that does much for morale. Particularly just before a horrible, tense mission.
They say I'm bad at man management.
If I'd have been there, I'd have been like, these strapping young warriors. Sure thing, boss.
Difficult to imagine Vader saying that. This guy doesn't even know how to operate his visor. Maybe his commander was right.
Well, you keep killing our good soldiers, so we have to get the people who don't know how to put on a helmet.
Do you hear the people sing, sing the song of angry men, sing the songs of the Gore who will not be slaves again? Come on, guys!
You tell me it's a rumor, and I will throw you out that window.
Oh, manual force choking your girlfriend. You can't do that. That's like rule 4 in the boyfriend handbook.
Ugh, I don't want to know what the first 3 are then.
Something in the dirt here. They need it. It's the energy program. It's directly from the Emperor. It's something they can't do without.
Ah, Dedra. That was a secret. Pops will not be happy.
We wanted to be together.
The rich old man was right. You've changed. I don't know you anymore. Dedra, you're breaking my heart. You're going down a path I can't follow.
You didn't seem to mind the promotions.
Yeah, you didn't mind the summer dresses and the pearl earrings I bought you.
Oh, Cyril, Cyril, Cyril. Did you really think you got those on your own merit?
Can't believe nepotism was so rife in my still kinda new empire.
Fire at will. Repeat. Fire at will.
Aw, poor Will.
How do they know that Wilmot's there? His blonde girlfriend probably talked. Which one?
It's a different Will. An Empire Will. Stormtroopers can hit something, when it's literally harder to miss.
My gran could have hit them in these conditions.
It's a good thing your gran isn't a stormtrooper then, isn't it?
Oh, I feel you, buddy. But we need those minerals.
Wrong side, buddy. That's our side. They are very green. But Gorman, in play.
Oh, you seem very pleased that this is all happening.
I'll calibrate my enthusiasm.
Yeah, let's cower with our faces smushed up against this single glazed window. Oh no, you can just tell that these guys are gonna have like flamethrowers for arms or machine guns for dicks or something. Oh, okay. Wow. It is good as kick as me.
You over-exaggerate. That barely hurt.
Oh, please don't forget to subscribe.
Get up and run?
Or at least do like a crawl sidestep.
Oh, swinging for the bleachers.
Yeah, that's a Gorman home run right there.
So these droids were built to go around punting people.
They're yeet droids.
Hey, Cyril can be a rebel now. Him and Cassian can let bygones be bygones and begin a beautiful friendship. Why did he not pull the pin and then run in the opposite direction?
He was weighed down by the suitcase of life.
That's not very friendly.
Not getting that friendship off to a very strong start.
It's like fighting a stray cat that just won't get off your back. Oh no! No, 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 no!
Who are you?
Oh jeez, that's got to hurt, Squirrel. It's like Thanos.
I don't even know who you are. That really is the biggest humiliation.
Who the devil are you?
Does Cassian know that he unintentionally pretty much destroyed Cyril's life?
Living in head around free. Wow.
You know, people don't think about you nearly as much as you think they do. Except for Cyril.
No! Cyril's redemption!
Oh, Bacter will clean him right up. We'll get him to a Force healer.
Nah, that won't work. Can't imagine anyone buying a Cyril action figure.
And that is how you win a street fight. Regroup, shoot in the head.
Hey! What are you doing? I'm not leaving without Gina! No! I've got to find her!
Oh, dude. You'll find another blonde lady who you'll promise you won't leave.
Get up! Get up! Get up!
You're much more likely to get somewhere if you're friendly and charming towards it than firing a blaster at it.
He's not trying to befriend it, he's trying to kill it.
I'm just saying. The energy you put out in the world is the energy that you get back.
Hey, I know you. Sam, I remember you. Thank you.
Oh. Wow. Looks like your life debt is repaid.
A Cinta for a Cassian? I'd say if anything, Val, he's now slightly up.
So misogynistic, Obi-Wan.
Because of military ranks, not because of anything else.
I can't leave her behind. Tell people what happened here, Cass.
Not again. Not for the 4th time. I mean, different girls, but yeah.
Forward. This is murder!
Pigs, or it didn't happen.
This fire. They made this fire and led us to the slaughter. Now they expect us to die without knowing why.
I hope you're happy, Luthen.
They burn so bright. Brighter than a hermit man in a cave.
Just wait. I'm playing the long game.
There's pain on both sides. Are you empathizing with Dedra? As I was about to say, Blue Ghost Man. Dedra way less than our side, like tons less.
Just because we're Imperial doesn't mean we don't deserve empathy. Just because they're Imperial.
Negligible empathy is the maximum you deserve.
Even as our fallen heroes are beginning their final journeys home, being asked about how an insurrection of this scale could be mounted without the aid and support of outside rebel assistance.
We saw it with our own eyes.
So you finally see the way the media twists it.
Aren't we the media as well?
YouTube doesn't count.
Of Gorman are mourned. We're sure to learn a great deal more about what happened here today and the price.
Oh, boy. Cyril's mom gonna dead ya.
Dead who?
Dead ya, Dedra.
Our own safety.
Wow. Oh, 2 of the best episodes. And Luthen wasn't even in them.
Yeah, they were okay. If you're a genocide fan, then sure.
We got a bite.
Do it.
Oh, no. Should have gone for the head.
Gotta say, very calm under the pressure of death. The Imperial officer. 2 inches to the left, and it's Kirk.
If America and South Vietnam wanted to win this war, they needed to clear some trees. In mid-1961, the South Vietnamese president Go Dinh Diem the state for help in the task. And in August, the South Vietnam Air Force began dropping a powerful herbicide over the jungles of North Vietnam. By the time the war was over, 20 million gallons of the so-called rainbow herbicide were dropped across Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. In comparison, a 24-foot in diameter, 5-foot tall pool, which is
There's a new body cam that just dropped today that's got a lot of people talking because it features an extremely big Minecraft YouTuber named Popular MMOs.
Hey, wake up, man. I don't got all day for you. Wake up. Wake your ass up.
Weed and a ton of fireball. Homie is messed up.
Just put your arms like you're praying.
Look at what?
Like you're praying.
Yeah, this like palm stuff.
No, I'm about to get chased!
You won't believe who it is, Sarge. Who is it? It's YouTube boy.
It's really sad to see someone spiral like this. Yeah, it was a really bad call to try and run away from the cops, especially in the condition he was in. He was way too fucking hammered. He was in a different dimension. He had left the corporeal realm. So when he tried to run away, it was in slow motion. He was looking like a claymation out there at 5 frames per second. So not the best call there for sure. One thing I found really weird about this, and you see it a bit at the end of the Sizzler reel where the officer goes, "It's YouTube boy," sounding like the owl from the How Many Licks Does It Take to Get to the Center of a Tootsie Pop commercial, is that these officers seem to fucking hate the idea of YouTube as a career. Like, it's not something Popular MMOs himself brought up where he was like, dusting his shoulder off. "Yeah, I'm a YouTuber. You can let me go now. Yeah, I'm a big deal." Squeezing on his own nipples or anything. He didn't bring it up. They found out, and then they start making fun of him for it and just kind of insulting it. They were just bullying him for YouTubing, like being a YouTuber. I half expected them to take him to a toilet and give him a swirly, or like an atomic wedgie while calling him a dork.
On March 20th, 2024, officers in Jacksonville, Florida receive reports of a man sleeping on a residential street. What they don't expect is to find one of YouTube's most popular former stars, who turns a simple wellness check into a chaotic encounter, leaving another mark on an already unraveling legacy.
You going to jail
again?
You can Minecraft that.
What? That doesn't even make sense. He can Minecraft that. What in tarnation kind of hogwash? If you're gonna try and come in here with your, huge quip at the end, at least have it be something sensible. "We're Ender dragging his ass to the slammer," or something like that. Better than this garbage, because this was nothing. This was literally...
Hi there. I just came home from picking my sister up at the airport, and there's a man kind of laying in the road.
Any drink or drugs, weapons involved that you know of?
I do not know.
Do you think he's trying to harm himself?
I think he might be dead, or I don't know.
An officer arrives to find a man lying on the pavement beneath a streetlight, dressed only in shorts and a t-shirt despite the chilly 45-degree weather.
So 911 received this call from a concerned citizen expressing that they thought this person might be dead. I half expected them to roll up and encounter a Peter Griffin death pose, but that was not the case. He looks like he was sleeping peaceful as fuck. He is sleeping like an angel right now. He looks...
officially surrendered, bringing the Vietnam War to an end. As the Vietnam War raged, America soon realized they didn't have enough soldiers to fight their war, so they turned to the draft. This draft was done by a lottery system, in which young men were given a random number that corresponded to their birthdays, and the men with the lower numbers would get called first, entering them into the Vietnam War. Of course, this was met with severe backlash, and several methods were used to get out of selective service. Some filed for a conscientious objector status, which is someone who refuses to carry a weapon by means of morality, ethics, or religious reasons. Think Desmond Doss from Hacksaw Ridge. Some people attempted to claim disability, or in extreme measures, they went AWOL and fled for Canada through secret exits. The draft was hitting college campuses particularly hard, and students banded together in protest to prevent their futures being interrupted by an unjust war. They would hold public draft card burnings, and teachers even got in on the protest, inflating the grades of students in an attempt to help them avoid it. The draft loomed heavily over the Vietnam War, and we're going to bring it up several times throughout the iceberg, as it caused and affected several aspects of everyday life. Approximately 1.9 million soldiers were drafted into the Vietnam War, and President Jimmy Carter would issue a presidential pardon to all draft dodgers while he was in office.
Well-known drafts, because it was like...
Chevy is called the heartbeat of America. Like the people who keep this country moving. For them, only America's most dependable truck will do. In every Chevy truck.
The Ho Chi Minh Trail was a set of mountains and jungle trails that were used by North Vietnam to transport soldiers and supplies across the nation. The trail was first formed in 1959 and expanded rapidly throughout the next 20 years. By the time the war was over, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a well-marked set of roads, with underground support sites like hospitals and barracks that was supporting well over 100,000 North Vietnamese people. America attempted to stop its use to no avail. This thing stretched for 1,000 kilometers, so policing this massive stretch of dense jungle was next to impossible. Some parts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail are still in use today, and some parts were paved to form the nation's modern highways. The M16 was the main weapon used by American servicemen in the war. It's a semi-automatic rifle that was first made in 1956, but like we said, its popularity and widespread use began with the Vietnam War. The M16 promised the American soldiers a more lightweight and deadlier rifle, but basically the second they were used, reports of problems began to rise. First of all, the rifles were not provided with cleaning kits, so a lot of them became dirty, causing the rifle to perform poorly. The rifle was light, like we said, and one thing not included with the rifle was chrome plating, causing it to corrode in the Vietnamese humid jungles. Finally, the rifle's initial ammunition had a weak propellant, causing the spent casings to not eject properly. These problems were eventually fixed, and the soldiers were properly trained in maintaining their rifles, but not a great start in a war, with plenty more problems to follow. Remember how I said we would be bringing up the draft several times? Here's our second mention of it. Fortunate Son is the anthem of the Vietnam War, coming out in 1969, and since then has popped up in various medias relating to the Vietnam War, most famously Forrest Gump. But how did this song become the stereotypical Vietnamese war song? Well, it's because it was written to protest the war, and its main message is to stand against people using their prestige to get out of the draft. As the song implies, many senators' sons were taken out of the draft thanks to their parents using their influence. It's the old saying about rich men making war and poor men having to fight them. John Fogerty was quoted as saying in 2015. The song is amazing, and if you've clicked on a Vietnam iceberg without hearing it, go listen to it. John McCain was a United States Senator, runner-up to president, and a Vietnam veteran who was a part of the United States Navy between 1958 and 1981. And we're going to talk about his time in Vietnam as a prisoner of war. Later, we're going to discuss the USS Forrestal Fire, but McCain got his first real taste of life-staking danger here, as he almost perished in the fire. He made it out, but later in the same year, he was participating in Operation Rolling Thunder, which once again, we will discuss later. John McCain's plane was shot down, and he was captured by the North Vietnamese soldiers, and was held as a prisoner of war for 6 years in the Hanoi Hilton, which, once again, we will discuss later. Man, this is just one big setup entry. John McCain was seriously injured by his plane crashing, but his captors refused to treat him, leaving him with fractured arms and one fractured leg. John was tortured and interrogated, and only received care once it was discovered his father was an admiral. In March of 1968, McCain would be moved to solitary confinement, where he would remain for 2 years. But he had a chance at early release. His father was made commander of all American forces in Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese offered him an early release for a show of goodwill. But McCain refused to go, and would only agree to being released if all the prisoners of war would be released. And they were not. Eventually, after 5.5 years of torture, disease, and broken bones, John McCain was released on March 14th, 1973. He returned home a celebrity and a hero, and would soon go on to have his very successful political career, but the nightmare he lived would be with him until he died. It's no secret the American populace hated the Vietnam War, and citizens across the country protested the war in various ways. The students at Des Moines Independent Community School District decided to protest in their own way. The students gathered in a home and decided to wear black armbands to school. The principals heard about this plan and issued a statement stating any student wearing the black armbands would be asked to take them off, and if they refused, they would be sent home. Christopher and Mary Beth Tinker would continue with their plans, and on December 16th, they were promptly sent home by the school's administration. The following day, Mary Beth's brother John Tinker would also be sent home after he came to school with a black armband. Their parents were rightfully mad. How could a school punish students for something as simple as wearing a black armband? The parents began a lawsuit against the school system, claiming their children's First Amendment rights were broken. The case went clear to the Supreme Court, where a 7-2 decision ruled in favor of Tinker, stating that the Des Moines school did infringe upon their students' right to free speech. And they also stated that schools did not have a right to infringe upon the First Amendment, as long as the First Amendment was not affecting the education of other students. and wearing black armbands clearly did not.
It's the Memorial Day sale at JR Furniture and Mattress. Huge savings on our great selection of top brands, in stock and ready to go. Shop online or in store and take advantage of 20% off select items. Or take up to 4 years to pay with our special financing options. Trending styles, huge selection, and spectacular prices. It's the Memorial Day sale at JR Furniture and Mattress. Family owned and operated since 1975.
The president of South Vietnam, Nguyen Dinh Diem, began the practice of persecuting Buddhists within his country. Dinh himself was a Catholic, which was the minority religion of the nation, as 70 to 80% of citizens identified as Buddhist. The peak of the persecution occurred on Siddhartha Gautama's birthday, who is the Buddha, and the founder of Buddhism. On this day, the South Vietnamese government banned the flying of the Buddhist flag, leading to wide-scale protests. During one of these protests, Vietnamese soldiers fired into a crowd of Buddhists, killing several. The next day, reporters were notified that something important would be happening at the Cambodian embassy in Saigon, but this message fell on deaf ears. That morning, over 300 Buddhists gathered in a procession to protest, and one of these Buddhists was Thich Quan Duc. Quan Duc stepped from his car with 2 monks. One of them placed a pillow in an intersection, while the second received a can of gasoline from the trunk. Quan Duc began to meditate on the pillow while he was covered in the gasoline, and then a match was struck, and he was set on fire. He uttered his last words, a plea to the president to end his persecution, but otherwise, he remained completely silent during his incident. A photo was taken, and it exploded in infamy. It brought attention to the situation in Vietnam, and caused the global community to pressure Diem into stopping his persecution, which he didn't. 5 months later, Diem would be taken out in a US-backed coup. During the Vietnam War, the American Army used several methods of psychological warfare, and we will be touching on them throughout the iceberg. We're beginning with the most infamous story that's happening, Operation Wandering Soul. Let's set the scene. Imagine you're deep in the woods of Vietnam. You're fighting off Americans who invaded your country. You can't see anything, but you do begin to hear something downright ominous. You hear this. That is ghost tape number 10, which would be blasted from speakers strapped to helicopters. In Vietnamese culture, it's said that if your body isn't buried or laid to rest properly, your soul is left to wander the earth. And this is what ghost tape number 10 was attempting to do. The idea was that this tape would cause North Vietnamese soldiers to surrender, fearing they would be met with an untimely death, and would also have to roam the earth. The tape also played voice clips of people calling out for help, and urging the soldiers to return home from the fight. It wasn't only blasted from helicopters, it was also put on patrol boats as they went up and down the rivers. And special units would sneak behind enemy lines and would play the tape on speakers. Wandering Soul didn't succeed. The Viet Cong knew what it was, and they would simply target the speakers playing the tapes, putting an end to Wandering Soul. Like we mentioned before, college campuses were a hot spot for anti-war protest, and Kent State is among the most infamous stories of this taking place. In the late 60s, several widespread and organized protests began, beginning with the 1966 Kent State Homecoming Parade. Protesters attended wearing military clothing and gas masks. Then in 1968, 250 students organized a sit-in protest against recruiters at the college. But on April 1st, 1969, the protest turned violent, as students began to clash with police. As we know, the Vietnam War continued into the 1970s, and President Nixon would expand it into Cambodia. Throughout the next few days, protester activity grew in scale, and at one point reached over 1,200 students in total. The Ohio National Guard, which already had members stationed at Kent State, attempted to disperse the crowd using tear gas. The canisters fell short, and the protest continued. The National Guard then took it a step up, and 96 of them moved forward with their weapons loaded. More tear gas was launched, but the Kent State protest continued. At 12:24, Sergeant Myron Pyrer had enough. He fired into the crowd of students with his pistol, and several other guardsmen fired their rifles. The shooting lasted a mere 13 seconds, but resulted in 3 students dead immediately, and another 9 would be injured. 1 student would then pass away at the Robinson Memorial Hospital. The National Guard had no remorse. Some soldiers stated they were fearing for their lives, and that caused them to open fire. Other guardsmen threatened students, telling them they would fire again if they did not disperse. This kicked the anti-war protest into gear, and widespread gatherings broke out all over the country. Over 400 colleges hosted their own protests, and the common sentiment that spread over the students was the message, "They can't kill all of us." 5 days after the Kent State Massacre, over 100,000 people began a violent protest at Washington, D.C., and the protests on campuses continued. On May 14th, 2 students would be killed at the Jackson State University as a part of their protest. Back to Kent State. No National Guardsmen were convicted, as they had claimed they fired in self-defense, a testimony that was accepted by the public. May the victims of the Kent State Massacre rest in peace. On March 16th, 1968, 100 American soldiers landed at a village named Son Mai, which the American maps had labeled My Lai. They were being led by Captain Ernest Medina. The soldiers expected to find Viet Cong fighters, but they were instead met by old men, women, and children who were simply participating in their daily activities. These citizens were then hurtled into a group, and they were killed. The killing started without warning, and the first citizen killed was a Vietnamese man, who was struck with a bayonet. That same soldier threw another man into a well and dropped a grenade inside. Other groups of citizens were led to mass graves, where they were then killed. Some bodies were mutilated, and the women there faced a worse fate. By the time the killings were over, 300 to 500 citizens were dead. Vietnam lists 504, and America lists 347. But we have to back up a second. Remember Medina, the guy leading this? He told his soldiers that any civilians would be gone by 7 in the morning, as they would have left to go to their markets, and anyone left would be a part of the Viet Cong, and they were ordered to kill them. A soldier asked if that included women and children, and Medina said that anyone running from us, hiding from us, or appeared to be the enemy was to be killed. They were also ordered to pollute the wells and to burn the village afterwards. Back to the actual massacre. Some women pleaded with the soldiers, stating they weren't a part of the VC, but the Americans didn't care. They killed indiscriminately. This was covered up. The first initial reporting listed 128 dead Viet Cong and 22 dead civilians, and these civilian kills were stated to have been from artillery fire catching them by accident. It wouldn't be until 1969 when a journalist interviewed a veteran named Rod Rittenhauer, who revealed what really happened at My Lai. 26 soldiers were charged with criminal offenses, but only William Calley, a platoon leader who killed 22 civilians, was convicted. He was given a life sentence, but President Nixon commuted his sentence to 3.5 years of house arrest. May the victims of the My Lai massacre rest in peace. The Green Berets are a group of elite soldiers that serve the United States Army. Think like the Navy SEALs, but like we said, Berets are
Would you say the same thing about the Nazis? Yes, the funny thing is, though, if you're asked to kill someone, you could refuse.
for the Army and SEALs are for the Navy. The Berets deal with counterterrorism, reconnaissance, hostage rescue, and other high-stakes missions. They were founded on June 19, 1952, and were among some of the first American soldiers to arrive in Vietnam. When they arrived in 1957 to train members of the South Vietnamese Army in counterinsurgency missions against the VC. Within the next 10 years, they ended up assisting 80,000 paramilitary soldiers, recruiting them from remote villages and highlands of Vietnam. In the early hours of April 6, 1967, Douglas Hedgel was knocked into the Gulf of Tonkin by an explosion. He swam to shore, where he was captured by a Vietnamese militiaman, where he was then taken to Hanoi Hilton, a camp we will discuss later. Here, he was tortured for information, but Douglas acted like he was of low intelligence. He claimed to not be able to read or write, and this earned him the nickname the Incredibly Stupid One by the Vietnamese captors. But Douglas was anything but stupid. With the help of a fellow prisoner, Joseph Kreka, Douglas began to memorize the names and personal information of 256 other prisoners. He was able to do this by setting the names to the tune of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. On August 5, 1969, 3 prisoners of war would be released by North Vietnam. Although the prisoners came together to not agree with an early release, an exception was made for Douglas because of the intel he had. Once home, he astonished the American officials with this tune, and would go on to talk about the torture he faced at the Hanoi Hilton during the Paris peace talks in 1970. Douglas is still alive and is still able to recite the names to this day. What a legend.
So when he'd ask me, Lieutenant Colonels, I go, Lieutenant Colonels Crow, Jim Hughes, Jen Lamar, Gordon Larson, Robbie Reisman, Strickland, Major General Baker, Hal Burns, Jim Jack Wilmer, Dick Bissett, Don Burns, Ron Burns, Art Ralph, Fred Cherry, Will Gideon, Larry Greener, Jim Highshaw, Ken Huey, Sam Johnson, Lou Mikowski, Ray Merritt, Al Runyon, and blurted out, my debriefer when I got back, he said, can you slow it down? I said, no, it's like riding a bicycle, you tip over,
Do you hate your boss? Do you hate them enough to blow them up? Because several American soldiers did. As the war continued, it decreased in popularity with both American citizens and soldiers. As morale plummeted, soldiers turned their anger to their higher-ups. Soldiers began throwing fragmentation grenades at their superiors to kill them, as the murder weapon would be destroyed after the deed was done, making the tracing of the murder suspect impossible. But these higher-ups would often be warned beforehand. Sometimes a grenade would be placed in their sleeping quarters with a pin in, or non-lethal smoke grenades would be thrown in first. But if the officer did not change their ways, they got fragged. The first report of fragging was in 1966, and it continued throughout the entire Vietnam War. In total, nearly 900 soldiers were fragged, and 99 of them ended in death. The Vietnam War caused the record for the most bombed country in the world to happen, and it wasn't even Vietnam, it was Laos. Laos borders Vietnam, and a part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail stretched here, so America began bombing the country to try and disrupt it. In total, 2.7 million tons of explosives were dropped on Europe during World War II. Laos had 260 million bombs dropped on it in total. This is the equivalent of 85,893 bombs being dropped per day, or 3,578 being dropped every hour, or 60 bombs dropped in 1 minute, or 1 bomb a second, for 3,000 days. Today, about 75 million, or about 28% of those bombs, remain unexploded, and unfortunately, about 25,000 people have been killed by these unexploded bombs. Today in Laos, many people make their living through these unexploded bombs, turning them in for scrap metal. And now, we discuss one of my favorite musicians, Johnny Cash. I'm worried though, because if I start talking about Johnny Cash, I'll never want to shut up about Johnny Cash. He's my favorite solo musician, and I'm going to be discussing my favorite Johnny Cash song, Man in Black, his anti-Vietnam War song. While Johnny Cash initially supported Richard Nixon's handling of the war, after he expanded into Cambodia, he quickly changed his mind, and would release his Man in Black album a year later. And at the center of it was his song, Man in Black. The song doesn't only voice concerns about the war, he also voices concerns for the disenfranchised, the so-called poor and beaten down. He spoke about drug users, and people who were being over-sentenced and were being kept in prison due to the littlest of charges. But what the song is best well known for is his stance against the Vietnam War. Johnny said he wrote the song for the soldiers who are yearning for home, and the ones who are dying it would never make it home. Overall, he felt our involvement was pointless. 3 years after Nixon expanded the war into Cambodia, so 2 years after Man in Black came out, Johnny met with the president, and I love this photo. Johnny looks like he's about to strangle Nixon to death. He doesn't look happy, because he wasn't. Earlier in the day, Cash stood in front of a Senate subcommittee and spoke about the nation's prisons and advocated for widespread prison reforms. Later in the day, Nixon asked Johnny to play at the White House, and he suggested some songs for him to perform, like Okies for Muskogee and Welfare Cadillac. The first one speaks out against protesters, and the second one criticizes people on welfare. Johnny Cash told Nixon, "I don't know those songs, but I'll play some of mine," and he performed several songs that were protesting our efforts in the war. The first song he played was What is Truth, a song with a very blatant anti-war message in the second verse. The next one he played was the aforementioned Man in Black, and he ended his concert with the Ballad of Ira Hayes, a song about the plight of Native Americans, and about the titular Ira Hayes, a Native American veteran who couldn't deal with the guilt of losing his friends during the war, who in turn drunk himself to death. If you're a fan of Johnny Cash, stay tuned. I've got something planned next month. Born in the USA is a song used widely as a patriotic anthem, which is hilarious because Born in the USA is vehemently anti-American. The song was released in 1984 and is about a soldier's journey into the war and the poor treatment the veterans received once it was over. It begins with a soldier joining the war not because he felt inclined, but he instead did it to avoid jail time. In the war, someone close to him is killed, but the Viet Cong, their perceived enemy, is still alive. So it invokes the question of, was it worth it? Once home, the veteran is denied a job, and is basically laughed at the whole time he is home. And the song hits the nail on the head. Vietnam veterans were not treated well. One side of Americans were mad that we lost the war, and the other side was mad that we were over there at all. And this anger from both sides was directed to the veterans coming home. And that's exactly what Born in the USA is about. On April 29, 1965, Charles Shelton was shot down over Laos while participating in a reconnaissance mission. He sent out a radio distress reporting how he escaped with his parachute and was requesting pickup. A helicopter was dispatched to retrieve him, but was unable to locate him because of the forest-thick foliage. And after this, he disappeared. His wife was alerted that her husband was being held as a prisoner of war, but this wasn't true. No one knows what happened to him, and his wife would unfortunately commit suicide in 1990 due to her grief. Shelton was marked as a prisoner of war until 1994, when he was then marked as killed in action, due to the fact he could not be located. He was the last official United States prisoner of war. During the 2004 United States presidential election, a subject of controversy brought up against President George Bush was his service during the Vietnam War. On May 27, 1968, George Bush joined the Texas Air National Guard and committed to 6 years of service. 2 of these years will be dedicated to active duty while training as a pilot, and then 4 years of part-time duty. Bush completed his pilot training in 1970, but never saw active combat. On October 1st, 1973, Bush was honorably discharged from the National Guard. And this is where the controversy stems from. That, and his attendance were used against him in the 2004 election. It is also claimed that Bush's father pulled strings to keep his son from seeing combat during Vietnam. Alright, we can begin Tier 3 with a reported cryptid sighting during the war. Or we should say sightings. Throughout the entire Vietnam War, soldiers reported sightings of a species of monkey that ranged in heights between 6 feet all the way up to 7. They had a range of fur collars between red, brown, and black, and they were covered, save for their knees, soles, hands, and face, giving them the appearance of an orangutan. These monkeys were also said to be aggressive, and were said to attack American soldiers that entered their territory. They would throw rocks at the soldiers, which is where the name rock ape comes from. And these weren't isolated cases. There are several stories of these things encountering soldiers. There is an area in the Sun Tra Peninsula that American soldiers nicknamed Monkey Mountain, due to how often these things were spotted. So what the hell are we dealing with? Shockingly, I know, but hear me out. They could have been monkeys. 24 different species of monkeys call Vietnam home. So it's likely this is what the soldiers were seeing. But of course, people also claim this was Vietnam's own Bigfoot, and serves to prove the idea and concept of the missing link between our primal ancestors and modern humans. While this story doesn't directly affect the Vietnam War, and it happened about 10 years before the war, it deals with Americans fighting communism in South Asia, and it's a silly story, so let's discuss how the CIA staged vampire attacks. After World War II ended, a group known as the Hukbong Bayan Laban Sahapan, or the People's Army Against Japan, or simply nicknamed the Huk, which is what I'm going to call them, pushed for a more free Philippines, as America was meddling with their elections. Now, America wanted to continue to meddle in the elections, so they began to fight the Huk. They didn't want a full-on conflict. America researched the local area's mythology, and they uncovered the Aswang. The Aswang were reported shape-shifting cannibal creatures, and America faked attacks from them to scare away the Huk. CIA operatives would kidnap Huk fighters, kill them, drain them of their blood, and would leave their bodies behind to be found. This rightfully scared the Huk, and I don't blame them. I would be pretty scared too if I found my friend drained of blood and dead. The Huk soon left the area, helping America in their fight against them. Here's a historical butterfly effect for you. A president ignores...
What, do you not have any fucking, like, weird creatures? What, does Thailand not have any fucking weird creatures in its folklore?
a letter.
What do you mean, what the hell am I doing? I don't even know what the hell you're referring to.
That later gets over 3 million people killed. The man writing this letter was Ho Chi Minh. The man who ignored the letter was Woodrow Wilson. We're going back to World War I, when Woodrow Wilson was a part of an Allied forces meeting that was discussing peace terms for the defeated countries. Previously, Wilson had outlined his 14 points declaration, and one of these points called for self-determination of all people. Now, Vietnam at this time was a French colony, so Ho Chi Minh reached out to Wilson in an attempt to negotiate their independence. Wilson ignored this. But this wasn't the only president to ignore a letter that could have prevented the Vietnam War, because Harry Truman did the same thing. Once again, this was a letter calling for Vietnamese independence, and once again, it fell on deaf ears. On May 2nd, 1966, Jeremiah Denton was forced by North Vietnam to give an interview about his captivity. He was a rear admiral, one of the highest ranked prisoners of war, so he was forced to be broadcasted. After answering questions in favor of the American government, Denton was taken away. But something was off. The tape was studied by US Naval Intelligence, and they noticed Denton was blinking rapidly. They quickly deduced he was blinking in Morse code, and his message was translated: torture. One unspoken word told Americans everything they needed to know. American POWs were being tortured. Denton was released in 1973 and went on to have a successful career in politics. There is a story of America dropping extra-large condoms, labeled as small, over their enemies' lands in an attempt to make them feel inadequate, Frank Reynolds style. In doing research for this entry, I've read it was used during World War II, used on Russia during the Cold War, and then again on North Vietnamese forces, but which one of these is true? One story says the CIA planned to do this, but they didn't. There are stories of soldiers putting condoms over the muzzle of their guns to prevent dirt from getting inside of it, but the condom drop story seems to be a myth, or an urban legend, or simply an idea that never went into fruition.
Did you not hear, like, the 10 seconds of audio?
There are stories of soldiers putting their enemies' lands in an attempt to make them feel inadequate, Frank Reynolds style. In doing research for this entry, I've read it was used during World War II, used on Russia during the Cold War, and then again on North Vietnamese forces, but which one of these is true? One story says the CIA planned to do this, but they didn't. There are stories of soldiers putting condoms over the muzzle of their guns to prevent dirt from getting inside of it, but the condom drop story seems to be a myth, or an urban legend, or simply an idea that never went into fruition. On July 31st, 2018, a piece of lost media was discovered in full, a short film known as Short Subject, or what is more commonly referred to as Mickey in Vietnam. The film was made by Milton Glasser and Whitney Lee Savage, Adam Savage's father. It features Mickey Mouse volunteering for military service, only to be killed moments after stepping off the boat in Vietnam. Whitney and Savage claimed they used Mickey because he was a symbol of innocence, my how times change, and was overall expressing protests against the war and calling for it to cease. The film was first shown at the International Short Film Festival in Oberhausen, Germany in 1970, and it was later shown at such events. Its first upload on YouTube came on April 22nd, 2013, but the full version with sound was uploaded 5 years later, allowing us to view this piece of lost media history. In a war of major escalations, the Tet Offensive may be the largest, and was one of the largest battles in total. The attack began on the morning of July 31st, 1968, which was the Vietnamese New Year, a holiday known as Tet Nguyen Dan, which is where the name Tet Offensive comes from. That morning, 5 major cities, tons of military bases, and other small villages scattered throughout South Vietnam were attacked. At first, these VC attacks were successful, and they actually held parts of Saigon, the capital, but they quickly realized they should have stuck to guerrilla warfare, as they began to suffer heavy casualties. Overall, the Tet Offensive was a North Vietnam loss. Their goal was of course to defeat and capture South Vietnam, but they also wanted to cause the United States to back off, and to inspire more South Vietnamese civilians to rebel. Both of these goals,
wherever the road takes you, Chevy is ready to drive you forward. With pure power unleashed,
failed. The Ace of Spades is the most famous card in a deck, and was used widely during the Vietnam War. After killing a member of the Viet Cong, American soldiers would leave an Ace of Spades on the body. It was their belief that the Vietnamese locals feared the Ace of Spades, as the Americans wrongfully believed that it was a symbol of death to the locals. In 1966, American soldiers made a special request to a card company to receive 3,000 decks of cards made entirely of the Ace of Spades, and the card company obliged and did it free of charge. While you might not know the name Nguyen Ngoc Loan, you definitely know this photo. This photo was taken on February 1st, 1968, and shows Nguyen about to execute a Viet Cong fighter. This took place in Saigon during the Tet Offensive. The man who was executed was Nguyen Van Lam and was a Viet Cong captain. He was captured during the fight and was brought to Loan, who did not hesitate to execute him. A few months after this, he was seriously injured by machine gun fire and would bounce around the planet receiving medical care, but his leg never fully healed and would be amputated in September of 1974. We're now in 75, and Saigon was falling. Loan approached the US Embassy to be evacuated, and after approaching several different planes, he was taken into the United States, where he moved to Dale City, Virginia, and continued to live the rest of his life in peace, opening a restaurant that specialized in burgers, pizza, and Vietnamese cuisine. In 1991, Loan closed his pizzeria. On the last day of owning his establishment, he went to the bathroom and saw a sign carved into one of the doors. "We know who you are, fucker." He would pass away from cancer 8 years after this. The USS Forrestal was a United States carrier named after the first United States Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. The ship was built in 1955 and was used in the Vietnam War. It left Norfolk, Virginia in June of 1967 and arrived in the Gulf of Tonkin on July 25th. 4 days later, a rocket was accidentally fired and struck a station jet that was about to take off. As we mentioned, John McCain was piloting this plane. The jet exploded, and this caused a series of explosions to go off that killed 134 sailors and injured an additional 161. When discussing the brutality of the Vietnam War, Hamburger Hill should be a staple in the conversation. Hamburger Hill, or Hill 937, was a peak in the dense jungles of the Chao Valley in Vietnam. Since it was so close to the Laotian border, it was a critical point the United States wanted to capture. But this hill wasn't going to be taken easily, as North Vietnam was heavily entrenched on it. On May 10, 1969, America began to attack the hill, but they were making little progress, and they were taking a lot of casualties. Machine gun fire and artillery strikes were wiping out American soldiers, and the infamous name of the Hamburger Hill soon arose. Several soldiers who were asked about the area said it looked like they were in the inside of a hamburger machine, implying that their fellow soldiers had been cut down to hamburger. Despite this, Hamburger Hill was captured, but was abandoned less than a week later, and less than 1 month after this, North Vietnam regained control. We've touched on the sheer amount of bombs dropped during the Vietnam War with the mass bombing of Laos and how the tunnels were made as a response. But now we can continue the discussion with Operation Menu. This was a United States bombing campaign that affected eastern Cambodia. The United States was targeting the bases of the Viet Cong and the Khmer Rouge guerrillas. Operation Menu earned its spot on the iceberg thanks to the fact it was the first time the B-52 Superfortress bombers were used, an iconic symbol of America's way over budget military force. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was the lifeblood of the Viet Cong, and America tried to stop the routes using the traditional ways of bombing it and patrolling it, but it was simply way too big for any of these methods to be successful. So America turned to a non-traditional method to destroy it. Throughout the months of June and October, Vietnam faces its monsoon season, which sees heavy rain hitting the country, and America made an attempt to extend its monsoon season by dropping lead and silver iodide into the atmosphere to generate rain clouds, extending the monsoon season. The idea was to soften the dirt trails of the Ho Chi Minh Trail so that they would be harder to traverse and landslides would happen among them. The slogan of this operation was "Make mud, not war," and mud was made. It began in March of '67 and happened every raining season through '72, so for 5 years. America had very little allies in the Vietnam War, but one I didn't know about, and by far the largest supporter base we had, was South Korea. South Korea and America were already tight due to the support they received during the Korean War. And South Korea wanted to pay the Americans back by supporting their war efforts in Vietnam. They also did this so that America would continue to help support them against the North Korea attack. The first South Korean soldiers arrived in Vietnam in 1964 and took on a more background role, serving as engineers and doctors. This would soon change, as combat operatives would soon arrive, and they quickly gained a reputation. South Korean soldiers were heavily trained and disciplined, maybe more so than America's own. One big difference was the fact South Korea trained their soldiers in extensive taekwondo to give them an edge in hand-to-hand combat. South Korea was also vehemently anti-communist, more so than America, thanks to the Korean War, which they had fought communist North Korea. So now they were taking their anger out on the communist North Vietnam. Within the first year of being there, 2,000 VC were killed compared to the under 300 South Koreans killed. South Korea participated in their own war crimes as well, killing over 9,000 Vietnamese civilians in their efforts. And they were responsible for the leveling of several villages. Overall, a terrifying force that VC avoided. Have you seen this photo before? This is, allegedly, a massive 100-foot snake that was photographed from the sky. There are two different stories of where this photo was taken. The first one states it was taken in the Congo in 1959, and then again it was taken in '64 in Vietnam. The photo is more attached to the Congo story, and it said that Colonel Remy van Lierde circled the snake, had this photo taken, only to then see the snake rise high into the air, high enough to strike the helicopter if it wanted to, so they left it alone. The snake was estimated to be 50 feet in length, and was said to be shades of brown and green with a white belly. There's a story very similar to this, where a helicopter is photographing trail lines in the woods, and the crew saw something slithering around. They approached it and saw a massive snake head pop through the trees, and of course they fled. It was reported that the snake's head was as big as a horse, and its eyes were almost 3 feet in diameter. Both of these stories are shaky, but the Vietnam War one is more so, Listen, I love cryptids, I've loved them since I was a kid, and I want to believe this. But seeing is believing, and this is the only thing I saw about this. I tried to find the documentary mentioned here, and I can't. Ooh, lost media, ooh. Now let's back up to the Congo story, though. The absolute largest snake in Africa is the Rocky Python, and they have been measured to be 50 feet, but the snake Remy saw was twice as large. As we mentioned, the snake was shades of dark brown and green with a white belly. The Rocky Python is more black and brown, but does have a white belly like the massive snake. But then there's that word, massive. That's part of the reason why old species died out. They were too big to feed themselves, so they died. Big things like this don't exist because they need to eat a lot. But while we're on it, let's talk about the Titan boa. This massive extinct species of snake that grew up to 49 feet in length. So this theory is that this snake is a leftover Titan boa. Okay, I've spent enough time on this nonsense. Great story, fun story, I want it to be real, but come on, guys.
Employee pricing across a full lineup.
Fun fact, Hank, Ford assembles the most vehicles in the country.
Another fun fact, everyone pays what we pay.
Now get employee pricing on a F-150 and 3.9% financing for 72 months.
And here we are. We've mentioned the mysterious Hanoi Hilton several times throughout the iceberg, and now we get to actually discuss what it was. The Holo Prison, which, first of all, translates to fiery furnace, so that should give you an idea of what we're about to get into, was located in Hanoi, and was first used by the French to hold political prisoners. It was later used by North Vietnam to hold American prisoners of war, in which the first one sent there was Everett Alvarez Jr., an American pilot who was shot down on August 5th, 1964. The Hanoi Hilton was anything but its hotel name counterpart, as it was brutal. We can start to discuss its brutality by looking at this picture of a cell in the jail. Their bed was a concrete slab, but this was the least of the prisoners' worries. The prisoners here were tortured for information. They would be stretched out until the victims felt their ribs begin to pull apart. Soldiers were also starved, and the whole place was of course unsanitary, causing disease to run rampant. In 1969, Ho Chi Minh died, and the torture here ceased immediately. The North then switched its propaganda to make it seem like Hanoi Hilton was more like a summer camp. Then 4 years later, Hanoi Hilton would open its doors, allowing the POWs to leave as a part of Operation Homecoming. Ho Lo continued to serve as a prison, but would have most of its buildings tore down in the mid-1990s. The remaining part of the prison is now a museum, showing off the conditions of the prisoners living here. You know, we could have been out of Vietnam a lot sooner, but part of the prolonged warfare can be blamed on Richard Nixon. Of course, he expanded the war into Cambodia, continuing it there, but we can blame him for extending the war during his Senate days. As the 1968 election approached, peace talks between America and the two sides of Vietnam were taking place, and it seems certain Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat, would secure a peace deal. But on the day before Democratic nominee Hubert Humphrey and Republican nominee Richard Nixon will be debating, these peace talks ceased. Why did this happen? They were on the verge of closing out a peace deal, and it suddenly stopped, and it's because Richard Nixon ordered it to stop. Like we said, the Democrat-led presidency was about to secure a peace deal, and this gave Humphrey a huge boost in the polls, and Nixon knew it was going to be a close race or even a loss. Nixon had a communication line into Saigon through Anna Chennault, and he had her tell the South Vietnam government that Nixon would secure them a better peace deal if he were to be elected. South Vietnam believed him, and they dragged their feet through their negotiating process. This made LBJ mad. Very mad. Mad enough to accuse Nixon of treason, which is absolutely what he did. But Nixon denied it through his entire life. Years after he died, the smoking gun letters were revealed that yes, Richard Nixon in fact stalled peace talks so that he could be elected. Richard Fitzgibbon Jr. was the first American soldier to be killed in the Vietnam War, and he was killed by another American soldier. His murder happened on June 8, 1958, and was perpetrated by Edward Clark, and this wasn't an accident. He very much intended to kill Fitzgibbon. The two were pilots, and allegedly Fitzgibbon reprimanded Clark for a mistake he made, and later in the night, Clark got heavily drunk and exited to see Richard on the street, so Clark pulled out his pistol and shot him several times. He then fled the scene and exchanged fire with the Vietnamese police chasing him. He then either fell or jumped off a two-story building and died. Yes, you heard that entire story correctly. This dude probably got told he took a landing too fast, took it so to heart that he got wasted, and shot that man dead later in the night, only to then run from the police and end up dead himself. The Vietnam War almost ended a couple of times, and we just discussed how Richard Nixon sabotaged peace attempts, but now we can discuss Operation Marigold. This was an attempt to broker peace, and was carried out through communication with a Polish diplomat, Jesus Christ, Janusz Lewandowski, and then an Italian ambassador, Giovanni Dorlandi, and then the US ambassador, Henry Cabot Lodge. Talks were beginning, but were quickly dropped once the continued bombing of Hanoi occurred. Lyndon Johnson was warned that peace talks were taking place, but he didn't care. He authorized the bombings, and Marigold died on December 30th, 1966. Rolling Thunder was another mass bombing campaign carried out by the United States against Vietnam, China, and North Korea. Their goals was to take out the enemy from the sky without the need to send in soldiers. To be more specific, there were 4 goals outlined: boosting the morale of Saigon, destroying the air defenses of North Vietnam, halt the flow of soldiers and material into the country, and overall, as we said, end the war without sending in soldiers. As we know, this failed, despite the heavy and vast amounts of ordnance fired. The Phoenix program was an operation led by America's CIA to identify and destroy the VC through infiltrations, assassinations, torture, and counterterrorism. But the Phoenix program was quickly pointing fingers and guns at thousands of people in South Vietnam who were thought to be a part of the VC. By the time the Phoenix program was discontinued, 26 to 46,000 people had been killed, and the estimates also range on how many people killed were a part of the VC and what percent were just innocent civilians. If you remember the My Lai massacre, it was one effort a part of the Phoenix program, and nobody killed there was a part of the VC. The Phoenix program has also been criticized for its brutality, as members often tortured people who were suspected to be part of the VC. People being starved were some of the least brutal methods used, as some of the things America did were truly deplorable and disgusting. Out of the 58,000 American soldiers killed in Vietnam, nearly 1/5 of them were under 20 years old, and Dan Bullock was a part of this crowd. However, Dan wasn't 19, he wasn't 18, he wasn't 17. My friends, Dan Bullock was 15 years old when he was killed during the Vietnam War. So now let's figure out how and why a 15-year-old was killed in Vietnam. When Dan was 14, he edited his birth certificate to say he was born 4 years earlier than what he really was. So he went through and joined the United States Marine on September 18th, 1968. He would be in South Vietnam 7 months later and would be killed less than another month later. He and 3 other Marines were in a hangar when a North Vietnamese soldier threw a satchel charge inside. He and the 2 other Marines were killed. Dan's grave wasn't even marked until the year 2000. It wouldn't be a major conflict without legendary snipers with iconic names, and the most iconic sniper of the Vietnam War has got to be Carlos Hathcock, or as the North called him, the White Feather, because he kept a white feather in his helmet. Before Carlos even stepped foot in Vietnam, he was already a marksman, winning several shooting contests at home and at his military base. He quickly continued to prove his skills, killing between 300 to 400 North Vietnamese soldiers. He only has 93 confirmed kills though, as back then, the sniper's spotter had to be the one to confirm the kill, and snipers were often without one. The North quickly made note of this mystery sniper killing so many of their numbers, so a bounty of $30,000 was placed on his head. Bounties on snipers were nothing new, but the previous high was $2,000. So the hunt for White Feather began, but America wasn't going to lose their prize sniper that easily. Every American sniper was ordered to place a white feather on their helmet to make confirmation of the real White Feather impossible. There's 2 infamous stories of White Feather I want to cover. The first one involved a duel between him and a North Vietnamese sniper known as the Cobra, who had already taken out several Marines and was believed to have been dispatched to take out Carlos himself. Carlos spotted the glint of something in a bush and fired. His bullet went through the Cobra's scope and through his eye, killing him. His other story is even more famous. Hathcock was given a mission to kill a northern general, so he took the feather out of his hat, the only time he would do so, and began to crawl towards the target. For 4 days, he crawled inch by inch until he made it to his target. He recalled being so hidden that an enemy almost stepped on him and was almost bitten by a deadly bamboo viper. But Hathcock made it to his target, took him out with a single shot, and crawled back, all without ever being detected. Hathcock soon retired from sniping after this, but taught other soldiers to snipe, before passing away in 1999. We're beginning Tier 5 with another weird creature that was allegedly spotted during the war, and that's the massive spiders of Vietnam. I'm a horrible arachnophobe, and I hated every second of writing and researching this, and I'm sure I'm going to hate editing it, but the show must go on. The first report of a massive spider in Vietnam comes from a user on the Crypto Mundo forum, named Mr. Maxima, who's retelling a story from their stepfather, a Vietnam veteran. The veteran claimed he was a part of a 5-man scout crew and were deep into the jungles of the nation. There, the crew encountered what can only be described as a massive spider. They were said to have bodies as big as dinner plates, and their total length was anywhere from 20 to 30 inches. These spiders were also said to have been found along various water sources, like creeks and lakes. Most bizarrely, the stepfather claimed that even after the soldiers unloaded their M16s into them, the spiders still moved around. So where to begin? We've got a long game of telephone that starts on a cryptid blog that looks like it hasn't been updated since 2001. I'm not buying it, but a researcher named Carl Schucker has, and is researching the story trying to prove whether or not this happened. There are 3 main species of spiders that live in Vietnam: the grass-crossed spider, the giant golden orb weaver — I'm getting cold chills just writing this story, by the way, I fucking hate spiders — and the batik golden web spider. The biggest one of these is the golden orb weaver, but the female of this species only grows up to 6 inches in length, a far cry from 20 to 30. But what about a species not native to Vietnam? Behold, coconut crabs! These things are massive, and they're spider-like, so it's possible the veterans saw these things, but they're not native to Vietnam. Here's their nativity, and here's Vietnam. But here's the catch. Adult coconut crabs cannot swim, they will drown. So it's very unlikely one ended up that far away. But larval coconut crabs can swim. But that far? I don't know, man. But you know what is likely? This is a lie. A story told to this Mr. Maxima in an attempt to scare him. But that's up to Carl Schucker to decide, and I hope he finds nothing, because I hate spiders, and I'm done talking about them. Let's move on. Fans of my World War II icebreaker remember the Axis Sallies and Tokyo Rose, women who would broadcast from Axis channels to Allied soldiers, taunting them and trying to get them to surrender. North Vietnam had their own version of this with Hanoi Hannah. Trina Thai Go would broadcast 3 times a day, and would list off the names of newly killed or captured Americans, and would play American music over the radio, attempting to make the soldiers homesick. She would also list the exact positions of United States battleships and the crew inside, stating they were all going to die.
GI, your government has abandoned you. They have ordered you to die, GI. Do not trust them. Defect, GI. It is a very good idea to leave a sinking ship. You know you cannot win this war.
Hanoi Hannah had very little effect on Americans, although it's been stated that soldiers were impressed by the fact she got their positions correct. For the rest of her life, Go stated she wholeheartedly stood by the reports she would read, and felt America's involvement in the war was unjust.
Step into Wix Studio and handle every part of your build from one platform. Map out your project with an AI-powered visual sitemap that generates site structures and wire.
On May 9, 1970, several students were protesting at the Lincoln Memorial against Richard Nixon's expansion of the war into Cambodia. Nixon woke up at 4 in the morning and saw the massive gatherings of people and decided to go down and talk to them. He spoke to a lot of the protesters and was kind of ranting and raving like a madman, which was typical for Nixon. He encouraged the people there to travel the world while they were still young, and he discussed their university's football teams. But no one was there for small talk. They were mad, and were expressing their anger to the president, causing the Secret Service to worry about his safety. So Nixon soon left. not before a massive, hairy man ran towards Nixon and asked for a photograph, to which he obliged. Bob Mustache was the so-called hairy man, and later claimed to be high on LSD during this encounter. Some of the students were interviewed about their talks with the president, and they claimed he had absolutely no sentence structure when he spoke. As we've mentioned, America found it harder and harder to get soldiers for their war cause. It was an unpopular war, and the draft only made it more unpopular. So the Department of Defense began a new plan, Project 100,000. This was a plan to recruit soldiers who had previously failed military intelligence tests into the war effort, and the name comes from the fact that their numerical goal was 100,000 persons. This went by other names, and the more commonly used one was McNamara's Morons, named after the Defense Secretary Robert McNamara. The project also targeted poor applicants, waving the dollar signs in their face that goad them into going to war. Project 100K overexceeded its goals by 3 times, recruiting 350,000 people to go to war. It immediately was a mess, as the soldiers of Project 100K began to die more disproportionately than others. Half of these soldiers went to combat roles, and by the time the war was over, about 5,500 of them died. Which doesn't sound like a lot at first, but this is 3 times the rate of other American soldiers killed. There are 1,200 missing American soldiers from Vietnam, but what's more mysterious is the disappearance of 3 American civilians in the war: Archie Mitchell, Daniel Gerber, and Eleanor Ardell Vietti. These 3 were on a mission trip to South Vietnam, where they would treat cases of leprosy that were beginning to spread. On May 30th, 1962, the 3 were kidnapped by Viet Cong guerrillas from their leprosy colony, and this was the last time they were ever seen. It's been said they were kidnapped to perform medical care for Viet Cong soldiers, but like we said, this is the last time they were ever seen, and were marked presumed dead in 1991. On May 12, 1975, the Khmer Rouge seized an American container ship, the SS Mayaguez, while it was sailing to Thailand. A sailor on the ship broadcasted a mayday, and it was picked up in Jakarta, Indonesia, so the US Embassy there was alerted. Aircraft in the Philippines and Indonesia were dispatched to find the Mayaguez, and it didn't take long until the seized vessel was discovered. It was at an island 30 miles away from the Cambodian mainland. Once diplomatic means of ending the conflict failed, a more aggressive method was put into place. US Marines boarded the Mayaguez while another group landed on the island. The Mayaguez was found to be abandoned, so all efforts were put onto the landing on the beach, and it was a mess. 3 out of the 5 helicopters landing there were shot down, and before the conflict was over, an additional 5 were destroyed. 3 hours after this mess, a fishing boat waving the white flag approached the Americans, and on board was the crew of the Mayaguez. They were peacefully returned, and they revealed they weren't harmed. A little bit before this, a message from Cambodia revealed that this was simply an investigation of a foreign boat in their waters that triggered into a bigger mess. 1,600 American soldiers never made it home from Vietnam, and Robert Borton is one of them. Well, he is if you ask the American government, but if you ask his family, he's visited them several times. Robert was 19 when he arrived in Vietnam, and 19 days after he made it, he disappeared. 2 veterans arrived at the Bortons and alerted them that their son was missing in action. They waited and prayed for any news, but none would come. 2 years later, the Bortons were browsing through a Marine magazine they were subscribed to, and Wanda Borton was looking down at her son. They took it to the Marine Casualty Office and asked for confirmation, but they weren't given any good news. They were told it wasn't their son. Later, the Bortons were watching a 16mm film of a Vietnamese prison, and again, they saw their son. But yet again, the Marines said they spoke to every one of the prisoners in the video, and none of them were Robert Borton. Allegedly after this, 2 men approached Robert's dad on several occasions and asked for him to change his status to killed in action, and his dad refused, until the men asked him to do it for his son's safety. His dad obliged and had his son's status change. The father was still not satisfied with this, and they continued to dig into it. Robert's sister, Diane, her cousin worked at a security company that often ran credit checks, and at Diane's request, he ran Robert's credit, but his number was stated to never have been issued, and after this, His cousin claimed that he was followed by a man, called by name, and was ordered to forget about what he saw. In 1990, Diane moved to Washington, D.C., and she was at a gas station when she saw a man filling up a red car. That man was her brother. He was leaving, so she didn't have a chance to talk to him. A month later, a red car pulled up beside of her, and a man was driving it, her brother. He smiled at her and drove away, turning down a road to Quantico Military Base. Diane was able to get the license number that was traced back to a car in Virginia, and the driver had no idea who Robert was. Overall, I think the story is that of a family seeking closure, and was trying to find their loved one through any means necessary. As for the whole being followed thing, I don't know, man. I'm reading off some ugly forum. I'm not seeing any sources on this. But on the forum was this. This random guy claimed to have been scuba diving in Gaylord, Michigan when he found this. This is a band made specifically for missing in action veterans. So what was it doing at some lake in Michigan? Is there more to the story? And do you guys want to follow up on this? A video fully dedicated to the story? I'm definitely interested in this, so if you are too, let me know. March 15th, 1962, the first day of combat in Vietnam for American soldiers, and Flight 739 was bringing American soldiers over to fight. The plane left Travis Air Force Base in California and had 4 planned refueling stops. The first one was in Hawaii, the next one was on an island airfield, then in Guam, and then the final one was in the Philippines. The plane made it to Guam alright and refueled, and they set off for the final refueling spot. The plane had enough fuel for a 9-hour flight, and this trip was only going to take 8. The plane radioed 80 minutes after taking off, giving a routine message about their position. This took place at 14:22 GMT, and the plane was supposed to land an hour and 8 minutes later. At 15:29, 9 minutes after it was supposed to land, a radio operator in Guam contacted Flight 739 and received no response. The aircraft was lost and was never seen again. The plane was declared missing in the morning of March 16th, and the Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines searched Guam. In the first day of investigation, 190,000 square kilometers of ocean was searched, and nothing was found. The search expanded to Okinawa, Japan. But after 8 days of searching, which now stretched over 500,000 square kilometers of ocean, it was called off. Flight 739 was gone. Flight 739 was a part of a flight line, and 2 other flights inside of it had their engines screwed with, prompting people to believe that 739 faced the same issue. So this will make sense, but of course, it's not a tan man iceberg if we don't discuss the bizarre theories. A Liberian tanker was in the area where Flight 739 was expected to be, and they had reported a bright light in the sky. And this report was made about an hour and a half after 739's last contact. The captain of the tanker went on to say that they saw 2 red fireballs fall into the ocean. But again, that area was searched and nothing was found. We've mentioned the heavy bombing so many times, but these weren't the only weapons dropped from planes in mass amounts. Behold, the Lazy Dog. These things were only about 2 inches in length and weighed about 20 grams in total. They were designed to be dropped from planes, like we said, but had absolutely no form of explosive. They were simply kinetic weapons and would use gravity to penetrate through the thick foliage on anyone hiding below. The reports of the Lazy Dog say they fell at speeds of 700 meters per second, which I don't know, I didn't ever take physics, gives us 14,000 newtons in force, which is powerful.
Wherever the road takes you, Chevy is ready to drive you forward. With pure power unleashed.
We've discussed how America tried to monitor the Ho Chi Minh Trail to little avail. They simply couldn't spare the manpower to constantly watch this massive set of roads, but they could leave transmitters along the trail, designed to report the movements of soldiers. But if these transmitters were spotted, of course they'd be destroyed, so they had to be hidden, and America would hide them by molding a shape that resembled poop, and then they would place the transmitter inside of it, keeping it hidden so that the Ho Chi Minh Trail could be monitored. Here's another effort at cutting down Vietnam's foliage. This time it was in the form of a 15,000-pound bomb that would be dropped off a parachute. And Ho Chi Minh Trail to little avail. They simply couldn't spare the manpower to constantly watch this massive set of roads, but they could leave transmitters along the trail, designed to report the movements of soldiers. But if these transmitters were spotted, of course they'd be destroyed, so they had to be hidden, and America would hide them by molding a shape that resembled poop, and then they would place the transmitter inside of it, keeping it hidden so that the Ho Chi Minh Trail could be monitored.
I mean,
Here's another effort at cutting down Vietnam's spoilage. This time it was in the form of a 15,000-pound bomb that would be dropped off a parachute, and would explode right before it hit the ground, clearing a radius mostly so that a helicopter could land. The radius cleared was around 500 feet in total. These bombs were also used during the Gulf War. In one report, a British soldier saw the powerful blast and mushroom cloud that was created, and reported back to their headquarters in a panic, stating, "Sir, the blokes have just nuked Kuwait."
Because it's a very powerful bomb that also made a mushroom cloud.
We're going clear back to the Gulf of Tonkin incident for this one. More specifically, the second incident. This is the one that didn't happen. Due to a misreading of technology, a report of a second attack was sent out, but like we said, this didn't happen. But what did happen? What happened that caused the United States destroyer ship to believe they were under attack for 4 hours? Sailors on the Turner Joy reported seeing torpedoes on the ship's sonar, or what they thought were torpedoes, because they were moving weirdly, and the Turner Joy never experienced any damage. So what was on the sonar? Giant pyrosomes. These are invertebrates that travel in a colony and flash a light when disturbed. They also float to the top of a surface and show up on a sonar. And yes, they live in the waters of Vietnam, so it's possible these harmless sea invertebrates caused the death of a couple million people. In the very late hours on a particular night, August of 1969, Earl Morrison and others were on the lookout for the enemy, but the night was quiet. Now, police and nurses watching this, they know, as soon as you say that dreaded Q word, the job becomes the opposite, which is exactly what happened. At about 1:30 in the morning, Morrison spotted something in the sky. It was a winged creature, with the body of a naked woman, but she was solid black, like a flying winged shadow. The creature got closer, about 10 feet away from the soldiers, before it took off into the night. Earl brought this up with the locals, who were terrified. They mentioned tales of this creature, and how they would often swoop men away to be eaten. Robert was rightfully terrified, and he kept the story to himself for years, before coming out and revealing it. Look man, it was the 60s.
Oh, what? Say it again? No, say it again? Say it again? The name? I don't think you're fucking saying it how it's spelled. That reminds me of something else. Oh, I thought you were talking about the thing on the right.
A period marked by an increase in narcotic use, and it was very late. But sure, this naked bird woman came down and almost took this dude.
You know AAA, right? But did you know AAA is more than that?
The United States Marines would often recruit Vietnamese locals to help them guide them through the jungles, and a common warning soon appeared. Watch out for the Ma. The locals described them as reanimated corpses that stalk the trees. The Marines shrugged this off, but allegedly encountered them in 1965. I'm gonna stop right there. When I made this iceberg, I was looking for mysteries and ghost stories and whatever else I could find on this website. I read this story and assumed it was more widespread and just put it on the iceberg at the very bottom without thinking about it, but now I can't find any mention of this anywhere else. As far as I can tell, this website made it up. Sorry for wasting your time. On November 18th, 1968, a Pennsylvania state trooper was driving down the road when he noticed a man sitting on the side. He pulled over and discovered that this man was dead, stabbed through the heart. This sparked a nearly 50-year-long mystery that was finally solved in 2012, when the body was identified as Robert Daniel Corval. Robert had previously done 2 tours in Vietnam and received 3 Purple Hearts for his bravery. He was now being treated at the Philadelphia Medical Center for post-traumatic stress disorder. Robert then disappeared and was thought he had fled the hospital. Little to anyone's knowledge, his body was found 4 hours after this, but wouldn't be identified for another 40 years. Robert was previously marked as a coward and a deserter, but received his proper respect after his body was found. So well, good and all, we found Robert, but what happened in those 4 hours where he left the hospital to the time he was found stabbed? Well, no one knows, and we only have conspiracies. Robert's mom believes he was murdered by his fellow soldiers out of jealousy and was dumped along the street. Others believe he fled the hospital and was killed by a hitchhiker, but no one knows, and it's likely we never will. On the night of June 16, 1968, the United States Marines reported strange lights in the sky near the DMZ, headed towards Tiger Island. This was the only activity reported until PCF-19 suddenly exploded. It was said that 2 rockets hit this boat, killing 5 of its crew. The remaining crew clung to a life raft and were later picked up, but the States had an enemy aircraft to deal with. Another boat requested permission to engage the aircraft, but the United States Command could not identify the aircraft in the sky. Rather, it was one of their own or an enemy. The aircraft opened fire, and there were no other friendlies reported in the area, so PCF-12 opened fire. PCF-12 soon reported that a helicopter was downed and crashed into the water, and the fighting soon ceased after this. The reason it's on the iceberg is because, of course, when people hear weird lights in the sky, they immediately think of aliens. Trinh Minh Thay was a Vietnamese militia leader during the First Indochina War and later the Vietnam War. His forces, what the hell was I trying to write? His forces were eventually added to South Vietnam's own military, and Thay became a general. At this point, Ngo Dinh Diem was still leading South Vietnam and was becoming incredibly more unpopular, and several militia leaders were planning to go against the president. However, they showed no signs of opposition. But on May 3rd, 1955, Thay was standing peacefully beside his military jeep when he was suddenly shot in the head. Nearly 70 years later, we have no idea who did this. Theories range, and the most believable one is that the South Vietnamese government did this out of paranoia that he would soon rebel against the president. We have another missing plane. Baron 52 was shot down over Laos on February 5th, 1972, a week after the Paris Peace Accords brought America out of the war. The plane was carrying 8 crew members, but only 4 bodies were recovered at the crash site. Officially, there is no answer to what happened to the other 4, but the family believed they were captured by North Vietnamese soldiers. On February 5th, the day the plane crashed, a North Vietnamese communications stated that 4 airmen were being escorted. And this wasn't the only message like this. Throughout the next 3 months, reports of 4 airmen captured on February 5th being moved were revealed. Baron 52 was the only plane downed on this day. So case closed, right? Well, not exactly, as some details around this are strange. It was reported by a columnist on Good Morning America that these messages were given to the family were simply misinformation. The story picks back up in 1992, when an investigation of the crash site was launched, and 23 bone fragments were observed, and these remains were proven to be a part of the 4 missing airmen. So case closed, right? Again, not really, as the families came together to request DNA analyses to be done on the fragments, to which the government denied performing them. The families continued to press for information, but nothing else came forward. On August 4th, 1972, dozens of sea mines suddenly exploded at once. These mines were in the water of Hun La, Vietnam, and were placed here to block North Vietnam from maritime trade. Soldiers stationed here of course thought a ship had hit them, but upon investigation, no ship was found. There's not much of a mystery here. There was a solar storm on the same day, and the sea mines going off were simply a result of this. We've mentioned several times now how well hidden the Viet Cong were. Through the Ho Chi Minh trails and the tunnel of the jungle as a whole, America couldn't even see their enemy for a big part of the war. General Electric put forth their solution. A backpack-worn machine that would detect things like human sweat and urine and would beep. A couple things wrong with this. The first major one is the fact that this machine would often detect the sweat of the person wearing it. Then if the machine did detect someone, it would beep loudly, giving away the American soldiers' positions. These things were not used for very long at all. If we can't see people in the trees, let's just destroy the trees, some war official high on cocaine probably said. In 1968, the American Army borrowed 2 of these massive machines to be sent to South Vietnam to clear out the dense forest to limit where the Viet Cong could hide. Agent Orange was in full swing and use by this point, and soldiers were using chainsaws and other hand tools to cut down these trees. But then these things arrived. These things weighed 60 tons and would use the brute strength to knock trees over, where their sharp wheels would then grind them up and break the logs. At maximum strength, a single one of these things cleared 4 acres of trees per hour. But these things never worked at full strength, because a big part of the day was spent pulling them out from the mud as they got stuck a lot. Also, they were easy targets, as it had no form of defense, and would be shut down by a few well-placed shots through the machine's water coolers. Suggestions for improvements were made, including putting a 50 caliber machine gun turret on top of it, but these plans never went through. Imagine this. You're in a helicopter in Vietnam, manning some massive machine gun, and you're handed these new night goggles to spot the enemy easier. You put them on and get back on your gun, but there's no enemies in the trees. They're above you, circling your helicopter. Black, shadowy demons circling in and out and around your crew. And you let into them. You start firing wildly, and your crew asks, "What the hell are you shooting at?" And you respond, "Can you not see those things?" Sure enough, and saw the red night vision demons. Years later, you're given these newer goggles, and you put them on, and your vision is now green, with no demons to be seen at all. Alright, you ready to explore a rabbit hole with me? Because my friends, I fell into one with this entry. I was curious, because that story sounded interesting. I love the paranormal and cryptids, and I wanted to find the source for this origin story. I couldn't find it. My adventure took me high and low. Through a podcast discussing people being sacrificed and fed to the sky people, not kidding.
And then so the Nemo can be thought of as the star people. They came from the stars. And then there were these people they called the sky people.
To a website that closely resembled the Riddler's website from Batman. Not this guy though, I would trust him with my life. And we have a fellow West Virginian here, what do you know? And back to my old stomping grounds TikTok. I watched video upon video about these red night vision demons, and none of them provide a source. Damn it, I'll listen to you all, but you gotta cite a source. Where did this story come from? Is there a name? What I did find was the fact that these old night vision goggles were made with Dicerian dye, and the conspiracy surrounds this too, stating this was the key to seeing the paranormal and now it's banned. It's not. I want answers to this. Where did this story come from? If anyone has some further reading for me to do, please let me know. I'm interested. I don't think it's real, but hey, I'll read about it if I can find it. And now, a war that was full of clusterfucks must end on a clusterfuck. And this may be the biggest one of them all. We're at the fall of Saigon, and America is getting out, and they were taking their South Vietnamese allies with them. This included 3,300 children, both infants and orphans. This action was criticized, mostly on the fact that, as we said, not all of these children were orphans, they had living parents in South Vietnam. But morality aside, the slogan of America in the war, these children were being taken into the states and their Western allies, like Germany and France. The first group of children were placed into a plane on April 4th, 1975, and everything is fine, they're taking off and leaving. Let's just hope the lower rear fuselage doesn't tear apart and the plane crashes into a rice field, killing 138 people. Oh god, that's exactly what happened. What a way to end the war. And here we are. I want to apologize if the order of this iceberg was weird. I knew very little of the Vietnam War. And I made this iceberg, by the way, but I was trying to fill its obscureness by my level of knowledge, so sorry if I put something too low or too high. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video as well as you could. We kinda got dark there a few times. If you want to follow the development on my new videos, my Discord server is the best way to see it, and it's linked in my description along with my Twitter. I don't post there, but I like seeing that number get bigger. Alright, that's enough for me. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Oliver lost his family just like you guys.
Today, November 11, 2023, marks the 105th anniversary of the end of World War I, a topic in history that is often overlooked by its more destructive sequel. But World War I is just as important to world history as World War II. It was the first real modern war, and saw the introduction of modern weapons such as automatic I really don't think World War II needs much of an introduction. It's a pretty straightforward conflict, and it's taught extensively in schools across the world. But for those who want to look just below the surface of the war, some things begin to stick out. From lost treasures, to unidentified flying objects, to entire legions disappearing into thin air, there's a lot of mystery surrounding the bloodiest conflict of human history. And by a lot, I mean 111 entries scattered across 10 tiers of an iceberg chart. Now you know what an iceberg chart is. I love them, you love them, but that person might not. In the simplest terms, an iceberg chart is a way of categorizing information. The higher you are, the more known the entries are, but as you go down, they become less known and more obscure. Before we continue, I'm going to give a content warning right now. The entries ahead deal with the following triggering content, and if I hit a particularly brutal entry, I'll have an additional warning. But enough of that. Like I said, there's 111 entries in this iceberg, and this video is going to be massive. This is by far the biggest project I've ever worked on, so any amount of support you give would be amazing. Drop a like, consider subscribing, and join me with Tier 1. In the final years of World War II, Germany realized they were fighting a losing battle, and they began to get desperate. This gave rise to the development of wonder weapons, which was headed by Hans Kammler. These wonder weapons included big guns, big planes, and, this thing, maybe. This is Die Glocke, or the Bell. It's a reported wonder weapon that is shrouded in mystery. The Bell was first identified by Igor Wachowski, and he described the machine as a 12-foot tall, 9-foot wide, glowing, rotating contraption with 2 counter-rotating cylinders filled with a purple liquid. Igor had no idea what this machine's purpose was. He speculated it may have been an anti-gravity machine or maybe some sort of time-traveling device. Anyone who knew a Die Glocke was murdered by the SS, and the machine was supposedly traded by Kammler to the United States in exchange for his freedom. But is there any evidence of this thing, or was this Polish dude just spreading misinformation for fun? Well, he was allegedly supplied with a top-secret Polish military document that detailed all of this, so it's one long, complicated game of telephone. It is true that at the end of the war, America sent teams into Germany to secure scientists and military technology before other powers, mostly the Soviet Union, could capture them themselves. And maybe they brought a 12-foot tall mystery bell machine home with them. It's pretty well known that when Germany took over Europe, they took anything with a dollar sign on it with them. The Lost Gold Train refers to the conspiracy theory that in the final months of the war, the Germans loaded a train in southern Poland with 330 tons of gold, jewels, paintings, and weapons. It left Breslau, arrived at a station in Friedberg, but did not reach the final stop in Waldenburg. People believe the train entered a coal mine and was sealed away to be retrieved later. Despite multiple searches, no trace of the train, its tracks, or most importantly, its treasure has been found. This one's pretty simple. It refers to soldiers and personnel who went missing during the war. From the United States alone, 78,750 of the 405,399 soldiers who died are considered missing in action. That's roughly 1 in 5. Towards the end of the war, high-ranking members of the German army weighed their options. Some committed suicide, some waited to be captured, and some, including high-rank Mueller, fled. Mueller was the head of the Gestapo, the German secret police. He was last spotted on May 1st, 1945, the same day Hitler committed suicide. He was quoted as saying, "We know the Russian methods exactly. I haven't the faintest intention of being taken prisoner by the Russians." That's the last time Mueller was spotted. All traces of him run cold after this. Was he killed, or does the next entry explain his disappearance? Most people know that after the war ended, thousands of Germans fled to South America, and more specifically, Argentina. Argentina was particularly open to their arrival because of Juan Perón, the president at the time. He was looking to fill his ranks with fascists to assist him in a takeover of South America. As many as 9,000 Germans fled to South America, and over half of them went to Argentina. Anne Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who is famous for documenting her time hiding from the German army in her diary. But you knew that already. But did you know there were two versions of her diary? She began writing her first one in 1942, but in 44, she began to rewrite it with plans to publish it once the war ended. One major change was a reduced appearance of Peter von Pels, a boy she had a crush on. By the time she was rewriting it, she must have got over him, as he's barely in the new version. Someone who has an increased appearance was her mother. Anne and her mom had a strange relationship, which she detailed in her first diary, but in the new one, she was kinder to her, leaving out the line, "She's precisely the kind of example I do not want to follow." One of the worst tragedies of World War II was the Nanjing Massacre. This was an act performed by the Japanese army on the Chinese populace, in which hundreds of thousands of citizens and soldiers were brutally murdered by the Japanese. Now, I don't want to list out every horrible detail that happened. I think I'd be here all day if I did. But you'll get the idea what happened when I say Japanese soldiers were encouraged to be as brutal as possible to toughen them up for later conflict. Because keep in mind, this was 2 years before World War II officially started. Nanjing was destroyed, and it took decades to be repaired. Today, Japan is iffy on acknowledging their involvement, and in 1990, they straight up denied it happened. But in recent times, oh, never mind, they're still pretty shady. Hirohito was the 124th Emperor of Japan, serving from 1926 to 89, which of course encompasses all of World War II. So you'd expect the leader of a nation responsible for all these war crimes would in fact be charged as a war criminal. Well, if you thought that, you'd be wrong. Hirohito was never charged with war crimes. This is because General Douglas MacArthur thought that a cooperative emperor would help establish a peaceful Allied occupation and would help with the United States post-war objectives. Moving on to Tier 2, and we're beginning with the disappearance of Flight 19, which was the designation for 5 bomber planes that disappeared during a practice run. The run was to consist of 3 major moves: a flight to some tiny islands to practice dropping bombs, a turn towards Grand Bahama Island, and another turn to return back to base. At first, the run went well and was on course, but in the back half, the pilots had this to say.
We can't be sure where we are. Repeat, we can't see land.
Contact was lost for about 10 minutes before it resumed, but a sense of panic seemed to fill the cabin.
We can't find west. Everything is wrong. We can't be sure of any direction. Everything looks strange, even the ocean.
Another 20 minutes passed before another pilot called the tower, but now they sounded hysterical.
We can't tell where we are. We can't make out anything. We think we might be 225 miles northeast of base.
The pilot rambled incoherently for a few minutes before the last words from Flight 19 were recorded.
It looks like we're entering white water. We're completely lost.
For 5 days, the Coast Guard searched the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. Over 250,000 square miles were searched, and no wreckage was found. Flight 19 went down over the Bermuda Triangle, the mother of all conspiracy theories. But the reality is, they probably got off track, ran out of fuel, crashed into the waters, and were abducted by aliens. Castle Litter is probably the weirdest battle of World War II. The place was used as a prison for French VIPs and politicians. Towards the end of the war, the guards abandoned the castle, and some SS soldiers were ordered to execute the prisoners, so they planned an escape. They sent a message out with the prison chef, who encountered Joseph Gangl. Now, Gangl fought for the Germans during the war, but he became disillusioned with the effort. He was leading a band of about 20 others who felt the same, but he realized his numbers weren't enough, so he drove to the nearest American unit waving a white flag. The Americans agreed to fight together and set up for Castle Litter in a Sherman tank. Once there, the army consisting of 35 Germans, Americans, and French celebrities set up defenses as the SS stormed the castle. The fight was dire, lasting all night and into the next morning. But finally, the coalition pulled through and they only lost one member, Joseph Gangl. Jean Moulin was the leader of the French resistance during World War II, and someone betrayed him. Apparently. Now, before Moulin came into the picture, France had like 10 different resistance groups, and Moulin stepped up to unite them into one front. Not long after this, he was captured by the Gestapo and was violently tortured for days. He never gave up any information on the resistance. But how did this happen? Who gave up Jean Moulin? Theories range from Rene Hardy, a member who was captured earlier, to just communist, but the betrayal of Jean Moulin remains a mystery to this day.
I mean, yeah, you forget that France had a...
Now, I know we discussed Germans fleeing to Argentina, but this theory states they kept going south until they hit Antarctica. In the late 1930s, the Germans showed an interest in Antarctica, and they actually sent an expedition to survey and claim part of the icy continent. Now, there's no evidence of any further German development here, but do you need evidence when a theory sounds cool? This next part is true. A German U-boat docked, at Buenos Aires, 2 months after Germany surrendered. Now, this is where the speculation and rumors kick in. Allegedly, the boat had Mustache Man, Eva Braun, and other high-ranking Germans aboard, and it left them in Antarctica before arriving in Argentina. But in another version of the story, Mustache Man's ashes were taken to Argentina and stashed with Nazi treasure in some ice cave somewhere. Well, the continent's melting, so we should have our answers soon. The continued endurance of the German soldiers had a secret ingredient, Pervitin, or as it's more commonly referred to today, methamphetamine. The soldiers on the German front used Pervitin to combat sleep deprivation, to increase their alertness, and boost endurance during prolonged fights. Between April and July of 1940, German servicemen consumed more than 35 million tablets of Pervitin. Victor Gerber was a pilot for the Royal Air Force during World War II, and he had several paranormal encounters while serving. However, I will be discussing the most prominent one, which happened a few years before the war. Victor was ordered to observe an old abandoned Scottish airfield in Drem. When he arrived, he noted how dilapidated it was. The strip was cracked and wildlife had moved back in. Later in the day, Gerber got back in his plane to fly home when he encountered heavy rain. He returned to Drem to catch his bearings, but the airstrip looked different. It was operational, with mechanics in blue overalls working on bright yellow planes. This obviously scared Victor, so he didn't land. He just headed home and decided to keep this to himself. That is, until 4 years later, the Drem airfield was repaired and the RAF switched their mechanic jumpsuits to blue, and they began to paint their planes yellow. Did Victor pull some Wizard of Oz shit and time travel during a storm, or once again, was he just spreading misinformation for fun? I'm not 100% sure what this entry is referring to, so I'll cover what I assume it to be, and that's Henrik Ross. Prior to World War II, Ross had a job as a sports photographer for a local newspaper in Warsaw, Poland. When the Germans invaded, he was given the position as staff photographer. He began to journal everyday life with his camera, but he daringly also documented the atrocities taking place. These pictures included children digging for scraps of food and large amounts of Jewish people being loaded into boxcars and sent away. As Warsaw began to be liberated, Henrik buried his photos in a box, hoping to keep them safe. 1 year later, after the Red Army liberated Poland, he recovered his stash. Unfortunately, a lot of the images have water damage, and only half of the 6,000 photos he took survived. The 12th Armored Division, also known as the Hellcats or the Mystery Division, was given the task of pushing through France after D-Day to retake occupied towns. On January 17, 1945, the 43rd Tank Battalion, which was made up of the Hellcats along with the 17th Armored Division, attacked the French town of Hellesheim. The attack lasted for several days, with each side taking and losing land in the process. Shortly after the attack began, garbled and desperate messages came from Colonel Scott Hall, the leader of the Hellcats. The final message that came from the 43rd Tank Battalion was, "I guess this is it." Nothing else was heard from them. The next day, the battalion's destroyed tanks were discovered, but there was no trace of any of the personnel. It wasn't found until months later that they had been taken prisoner. Well, that was kind of anticlimactic. After Pearl Harbor, Japanese pilot Shigenori Nichikachi landed his plane on the Hawaiian island of Niihau. Prior to the attack, the Japanese planned for the island to act as a landing pad for damaged planes, and a submarine will be by soon to pick them up. The Japanese thought the island was uninhabited. They were wrong. Nichikachi was greeted by native Hawaiians as he landed, who had no knowledge of the attack. Two native Hawaiians by the name of Yoshio and Irene Harada spoke Japanese, and Shigenori told them of the attack. The Haradas kept it a secret, and Shigenori was placed under house arrest. He was treated well until that night, news of the attack on Pearl Harbor came through a battery-operated radio. The pilot was taken hostage, and his weapons along with military documents were seized by Hauea Kalehano, the first man to greet Shigenori as he crashed. However, he convinced the Haradas to help him escape. Since there was no sign of the submarine, Shigenori decided on Plan B, die with honor. He began to terrorize the town, setting buildings on fire and taking hostages. He wanted his papers back from Hauea, but he was eventually overpowered by his hostages. Shigenori was killed, and knowing what would happen to them for assisting the enemy, Yoshio Harada committed suicide. Irene Harada was imprisoned for 3 years. We briefly touched on Hans Kammler earlier. He was in charge of the Wonder Weapons Department of Germany. He disappeared in the final days of World War II, which led to speculation around his fate. Like we touched on earlier, one theory states Hans was taken into the United States in exchange for some of the information surrounding the Wonder Weapons. Other theories point to suicide, but a body was never recovered. And of course, the ever-existing theories of fleeing to Argentina are around Hans. Regardless, he would be over 120 years old today, so he's dead wherever he ended up. We briefly touched on Anne Frank earlier, and this mystery refers to who gave her up. You see, Anne Frank stayed hidden for 2 years before suddenly being discovered by the German army. So what happened? Why was Anne Frank suddenly discovered? Well, reports of an anonymous phone call was made that tipped off German police to her hiding place, but who made this call? One theory states it was Anna Jake, a Jewish woman who was captured and given the choice between deportation or assisting with catching other Jewish people. But evidence of the phone call is next to non-existent. In 1944, when Frank was captured, phone lines were down across the country, and regular citizens would not have access to a private phone line. World War II really affected all corners of the planet, and Tibet was no exception. However, Germans in Tibet refers to the scientific expedition that took place between 1938 to 1939. The purpose of this trip was to seek the origin of the Aryan race. The word Aryan comes from the Sanskrit word Arya, meaning noble. In the Vedas, the oldest Hindu scripture, Arya refers to a race of light-skinned people who conquered the Indian subcontinent. Now, Mustache Man came up with the theory that the original Aryans mixed with the locals of India, causing them to lose their traits and make them racially superior. How did this nutjob almost conquer the world? Regardless, 5 members of the SS were sent to Tibet to A. Begin diplomatic ties that might assist in a later attack on British-controlled India, and B. Find the original Aryans. One of the 5 SS members was Brunner Beger, a young anthropologist who took measurements of the local skulls to compare to the development of their own. However, the beginning of World War II cut their trip short. As we discussed, in their invasions, Germany took everything with a dollar sign on it with them, and Poland was no different. Poland is missing several national treasures, including the Knights Templar's treasure, the entire collection of the Warclaw University Library, and the Amber Room, which we will discuss soon. The Spear of Destiny was the weapon used to pierce Jesus Christ while on the cross. Because of this, it was said to be imbued with magical properties and was a guaranteed victory in battle for the wielder. It was passed from leader to leader in history, from Constantine to Charlemagne to the Legion of Doom, and finally to the Mustache Man. After Germany annexed Austria, the spear now belonged to Mustache Man, and he moved it to Nuremberg. As World War II raged and Germany began to lose more and more land, the Allies captured Nuremberg, and therefore the spear. In the legend, it says that whoever has control of the spear then loses it is said to die. Well, sure enough, 10 days after this, Mustache Man died. Now, is any of this real? Well, the spear's real, but the magical properties have less to be desired. Mustache Man believed in it, and he paid the price for it. This is the Amber Room, or more specifically, this is a painting of the Amber Room. This was a gift to Peter the Great in 1716 and was meant to celebrate peace between Russia and Prussia. The room was made of several tons of the precious gemstone and was shipped in 18 massive crates to St. Petersburg, where it was installed in the Winter House. The room was later moved and redesigned to fit in the Catherine Palace. The room was made of 6 tons of amber, which was backed with gold leaf, giving us a massive shiny room worth $142 million. World War II rolls around and Germany begins Operation Barbarossa, which saw tons of art removed from Russia, including the Amber Room. The room was shipped to Germany and was reinstalled in the Königsberg's castle. Now we enter late 1943 and the war begins winding down. The Amber Room was packed up once again as the Allied powers grew closer. The castle was destroyed in bombing runs, and with it, any trace or trail of the Amber Room. Now it's theory time. The basic one is that the Amber Room was destroyed in the bombing run. Yeah, boring, I know. Next up, the Amber Room was loaded onto a ship and it rather sunk or they stored it somewhere. Antarctica, anybody? Finally, and perhaps the craziest, Russia might have made a fake Amber Room and Germany took that back with them. Regardless, the Amber Room was recreated in 2004, marking the 300th anniversary of St. Petersburg, but the original Amber Room is still lost today. Foo Fighter is a blanket term that describes unidentified flying objects spotted by both America and Britain in World War II. One story comes to us in 1944, when British pilot Edward Shoulder described 10 bright orange lights following at high speeds. No radar picked up these anomalies, so Edward decided to chase them, at which point they backed off and disappeared. More reports came from other pilots, ranging from red to green to yellow lights. The phenomena were nicknamed Foo Fighters. Foo was a common word at the time, and it came from the popular children's book The Smoky Stover. And yes, the band got their name from this unidentified phenomena. Jesus Christ, these assholes were storing treasure wherever they wanted to, huh? This one might have some backing, as Lake Toplitz served as an isolated testing ground for Germany. The theory states that at the tail end of the war, Germans were loading up boats of treasure to be sent to Lake Toplitz, to dump into the water for later retrieval. However, if there's treasure at the bottom of this lake, it's probably gone forever. It's a 300-foot drop with layers of sunken logs at the halfway point. There have been searches at the lake, but they've already killed 5 divers. Alois Brunner was a high-ranking German captain during World War II and was the architect of the final solution. He personally oversaw the killings of 130,000 Jewish people, but like many high-ranking members, his ending remains ambiguous. He slipped through the Allied powers' hands at the end of the war and fled to Egypt in 1953. He remained on the run for the rest of his life, hopping between various African and Middle Eastern countries. Several reports of his death have popped up. The major one was in Israel, who claimed to have got him in a parcel bombing in 1961. However, he survived this and moved to Syria. He finally died at the age of 89 in a basement in Damascus. He lived his last years in squalor, eating very little while refusing to bathe. The Columbus Globe for state and industry leaders, or Mustache Man's Globe, refers to 2 massive globes made in Berlin in the 1930s. One was made for the National Socialist Party, and one was made for Mustache Man himself. The globe was the size of a Volkswagen Beetle and had several modifications in comparison to a standard globe. For example, Ethiopia was renamed Italian East Africa. When Berlin was captured by the Soviets, they added their own modifications. They put several bullet holes through Germany, and that's the last verified mention of Mustache Man's own personal globe. Today, there's a total of 3 of these in Berlin, but no one knows which one was owned by the former dictator. There are a lot of strange individual soldiers in World War II, and Laurie Torney is one of them. He earns his spot on this iceberg because of his efforts in fighting with Finland, Germany, and finally, the United States. Following the invasion of Poland, the Soviet Union had their eyes on Finland. Stalin tried to annex the nation, but they refused it, so Stalin went for the invasion, beginning the Winter War. This gave Laurie his first experience with fighting, being assigned the position of light infantry, which was tasked with taking out Soviet tanks. At the end of the Winter War, Finland became a neutral country, but Laurie still wanted to fight. So once Germany attacked the Soviet Union, Laurie was right there with Germany to fight. However, he was injured in a landmine explosion and was hospitalized for several weeks. But if you thought that was going to stop him, you'd be dead wrong, as he got right back up to keep fighting. But he didn't fight for long, as he soon stepped on another landmine. At that point, you gotta think the universe is trying to tell you something. Well, if the universe was trying to tell him something, Laurie wasn't listening, as he still wanted to fight the Soviet Union. He was put in charge of a German naval unit, but this was right as Russia was closing in around Berlin, and Laurie finally realized he wasn't winning this fight. So he turned himself in, not to the Soviets, but a nearby British unit. Being a British prisoner was surely better than rotting in a Soviet gulag, but he was still a prisoner. Torny wasn't content with this, so he just left the prison. He escaped to Finland, but was not granted with a hero's welcome. He was arrested for treason and was sent to a high-security prison via train. But Laurie once again said fuck this and just rolled off the train. Laurie avoided capture for several months, but was turned in, captured, and sentenced to 6 years in jail. Now, Laurie was famous for staying in prison waiting out a sentence, so it was a complete shock when in 1947 he just walked out of prison again. Now, I guess he got bored because he soon turned himself back in, but once again, he escaped. Laurie had no idea what to do at this point, so he said, fuck it, I'm going to South America to become a lumberjack. He probably got bored after like 5 minutes, so he then went to New York, where he was immediately picked up by the CIA. But they weren't there to take him to jail. They were there with a job offer. Laurie Torney became a member of the Green Berets and was soon fighting in the Vietnam War, where he finally met his end. While on a scouting mission in a helicopter, he was shot down. Laurie's remains were finally identified in 2003 and was buried along with the remaining South Vietnam Air Force casualties. The Chickajima incident is the story of how we almost had a president be cannibalized. On September 2nd, 1944, a group of American bombers took to the skies. The mission was to take over a place called Chickajima, a tiny island 500 miles away from Japan. Chickajima was a heavily guarded island with 25,000 personnel along with anti-air cannons, so the pilots didn't really stand a chance. They were soon shot down, and all 9 pilots went into the ocean. One was saved by a local American boat, but the other 8 weren't so lucky. They were tortured, beaten, killed, and cannibalized. Now, none of this was revealed to the public until 2003, as the American government didn't want to admit that some of their soldiers they sent to war were eaten. As for that 9th pilot, it was the 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush. Get right into it. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the base was obviously on high alert. The day after the attack, radars of the base lit up with an unidentified object seemingly coming from Japan. Attempts at radio contact were met with silence, so planes were scrambled to investigate. They found it was an American Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. However, the plane was riddled with bullet holes, the engines were sputtering and coughing. But the strangest thing was the pilot. He was bloody and struggling to keep his plane under control. It suddenly went down and plunged into the Pacific Ocean. Despite searches, no trace of this plane was ever found. The Ghost Army was a secret unit of the United States Army during World War II. But instead of fighting the Axis powers head-on, their goal was to trick them. They used inflatable tanks along with speakers that blared pre-recorded tracks of soldiers in action. This was done to divert enemy attention and mislead German forces about the actual location and strength of American units. Rudolf Hess was one of Mustache Man's best friends. He was the 3rd person in the hierarchy of the National Socialists and actually helped write Mein Kampf. In 1941, Rudolf took a solo flight to Scotland. A solo manned plane flying in the pitch black over enemy territory in the middle of a war is surprising in itself, but his purpose was even more surprising. He was attempting to establish peace talks between the Duke of Hamilton, which was a Scottish leader, and Germany to stage an overthrow of Winston Churchill in Britain. Now, Mustache Man had no idea he was doing this, so he declared him insane, and Hess's plan only went further off the rails from there. He was arrested, and he tried to commit suicide by throwing himself off a flight of stairs. He failed and spent the rest of his war in British hands. But the conspiracy surrounds his purpose. Was this completely of his own valediction, or was he sent there by someone else? Very, very, very few conflicts of World War II took place on the United States mainland, and the Battle of LA is the strangest one to take place. I'm kinda surprised it's down the slide, I think it's pretty known. But regardless, the event took place on February 25th, 1942. This was only 3 months after Pearl Harbor, so paranoia was at an all-time high. At 2 in the morning, a military radar picked up contact with something in the sky. The city was immediately placed into a blackout, and anti-air cannons searched the sky for their bogey. Then at 3 in the morning, they found it. The sky erupted into fire as an unidentified flying object was discovered. The entire city watched the firefight, but something was wrong. They saw the explosions from the ground cannon, sure, but no one could see what they were shooting at. I could barely see the planes, but they were up there alright. I could see about 6 planes, and shells were bursting all around them. A coastal artilleryman by the name of Charles Patrick later wrote in a letter. But officially, no Japanese planes were discovered. So what were these people shooting at? Was this just paranoia taking over, or was there something in that LA sky that night that American weapons couldn't take down? The combination of World War I and the Hindenburg disaster made blimps pretty obsolete by the time World War II rolled around, but they still found some use during the conflict. One such blimp was the L-8, an American craft. The blimp's main purpose was surveillance, and it undertook a mission on August 16, 1942. It left the small island off the coast of San Francisco to survey the local Pacific waters. The blimp was manned by 2 people, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and Ensign Charles Ellis Adams, who were both incredibly experienced pilots. Little did anyone know, that would be the last time the 2 would ever be seen. 5 hours later, the L-8 crashed in Dolly City, California. The blimp scraped rooftops and took down power lines as it burst into flames. Firefighters rushed to save the crew, only to find there was no one to save. The blimp was empty. Both pilots were mysteriously gone. The blimp was barely packed away before the newspapers gave this incident the nickname Ghost Blimp. What happened to these pilots? Well, let's try and piece it together from their flight. An hour and a half into their mission, they spotted an oil slick in the water, a possible sign of a submarine. That was the last report anyone heard from their radios. In the wreckage, both pilots' parachutes were found, ruling out the theory they abandoned their craft. Well, that's answered nothing, so let's dive into conspiracies. The official report is simple. They fell out of the blimp. But that's boring, so let's look at the crazy conspiracy theories. They range from the theory they defected to Japan, they were murdered from a stowaway, and of course, they were abducted by aliens. But the mystery and fate of the ghost blimp pilots remains unsolved today. More missing gold, this time from Erwin Rommel, one of the German generals. His unit was responsible for taking 20 million euros worth of gold from Tunisia. The gold was extorted throughout the entire war, and is still missing to this day.
I'll be back.
I couldn't find a lot on this one, but I'll report the very little I could find. The Big Stoop plane was a B-17 Flying Fortress that flew from Iceland and had to land in Greenland after they ran out of fuel. The crew had to abandon their planes, and they suffered no casualties and were completely rescued. But years later, the pilots returned to their crash site and were astonished at how destroyed their wreckage was. Japan had several strange plots to attack the United States mainland, and the Fugo balloon bomb was one such plot. The balloon had a diameter of 33 feet and was filled with explosives. Japan launched thousands of these things against the west coast, with the plan to start forest fires and to spread panic. However, the bombs were ineffective, as the west coast was in its damp season. But one bomb landed in Oregon and killed 6 people. The event was censored by the US media, both to present the spread of hysteria and to prevent Japan from knowing they succeeded in some capacity. These were the only casualties of World War II to pass on the continental United States. Glenn Miller is considered the father of military bands, as he was a musician who later served as a fighter pilot. Glenn Miller and his orchestra were the best-selling band between 1939 to 1943, and they often performed for soldiers stationed across Europe. Miller's band was to fly to France for a performance on December 12, 1944. His flight was cancelled due to bad weather, which upset him. But he learned a friend of his, Lieutenant Colonel Northern Bassel, was to fly to France on December 15th. So Miller hitched a ride, and that was the last time he was ever seen. The plane carrying the two never made it to France, and despite multiple searches, no trace of it has ever been found. The Bloodfahne, or the Blood Flag, was an icon of 1920s Germany. It was originally carried during the Beer Hall Putsch, in which it was soaked in the blood of 2 people shot there. The flag was hung in the National Socialist headquarters in Munich, and it was taken to special ceremonies like funerals for higher-ups. The flag was last seen publicly on October 18, 1944 at a funeral, before it disappeared altogether. Historians believed it was rather destroyed in the Allied bombings of Munich, or was taken by the Americans as a trophy. No Picnic on Mount Kenya is a book that accounts the real-life story of Italian prisoners who climbed Mount Kenya in 1943 to escape a British prison. Felice Benuzzi quickly grew tired of the tedious life of a prisoner and put forward his idea of escaping the prisoner by climbing Mount Kenya. He asked one of his prisoner friends, who happened to be an expert mountain climber, what he thought of the idea, and he called him a nut job, stating he would need 6 months of preparation to climb the mountain. This went in one ear and right out the other, as he convinced 2 other prisoners, a doctor and a sailor, to break out together. The prisoners escaped in 1943 and began their ascent to Mount Kenya. The group of 3 prisoners climbed using improvised equipment, and they made it to the top on February 10th. After this, they probably looked at each other like, alright, what the fuck do we do now? So they climbed back down Mount Kenya and went right back to their POW camp. They received 7 days of solitary confinement for this. The book was first published in 1946 and was actually written by Felice Benuzzi. After Poland was invaded in 1939, Władysław Sikorski quickly became the prime minister for the little government organization the Polish had left. He quickly established relations with other Allied leaders, but he wouldn't last too much longer after this. Władysław was taking several missions across the world to visit Polish soldiers to help raise morale. On July 4th, 1943, Władysław began to take off from the Gibraltar airport, where his plane began to break down. It crashed mere seconds after takeoff, plunging him into the Strait of Gibraltar. The crash killed him, his daughter, and 9 others. The crash was blamed on cargo shifting towards the back of the plane upon takeoff, but many weren't happy with this explanation. Questions around foul play began to rise, and fingers were pointed at the Soviet Union. You see, before all of this, relations between Poland and the Soviet Union were breaking down, poor choice of words, and many think this might have had something to do with his death. In April of 43, just 2 months before he died, the bodies of 20,000 Polish soldiers were discovered by the Germans, who then put the blame on the Soviets. Stalin denied any involvement with this, blaming the Germans instead. Sikorski began to investigate this himself, to which the Soviets accused him of working with the Germans, completely severing ties with him. So did the Soviets sabotage his plane to prevent him from digging deeper? Joseph Mengele is one of the evilest figures of World War II. Nicknamed the Angel of Death, Joseph oversaw a lot of the killings at Auschwitz and was running several deadly experiments on his prisoners. Some of his most heinous experiments were practiced on twins. One twin was usually kept as a control, and the other was subjected to everything from blood transfusions to injections with diseases. They also were amputated and murdered. The twin that died was dissected and studied, while the surviving twins were also killed and subjected to the same scrutiny. In Mengele's mind, twins would reveal the secrets to heredity and would help fulfill Germany's idea of a pure future. Joseph Mengele is one of the highest-ranked Germans to never be captured by Allied powers, dying on February 7, 1979. He died from a stroke while swimming in Sao Paulo, Brazil, causing him to drown. Another country Japan committed atrocities against was the Philippines. In 1945, the Americans were slowly retaking the islands and pushing their way to Japan. This of course led to retreats from the Japanese army, and this didn't make them happy, so they took their anger out on the citizens as they left. I'm going to discuss some of the Japanese's dark actions, so if you don't want to hear them, there will be a timestamp you can skip to. Violent mutilations and rapes took place in schools, hospitals, and churches. Filipino women and children were taken as human shields, and if they survived, they were still killed by the Japanese. Pregnant women had their stomachs torn open, and girls as young as 14 were sexually assaulted by groups of up to 20 soldiers. And if anyone tried to defend themselves, they were mutilated and killed. An exact death toll doesn't exist, but estimates place it close to 100,000. Tomoyuki Yamashita was the Japanese general in control of the Philippines, so all of the fault fell on him. He was tried as a war criminal, even though some were against it. One such dissenter was Alan Ryan, who argued that there was no evidence that Yamashita committed crimes there, ordered anyone to do so, or was in a position to prevent them. Regardless, he was found guilty and hung on February 23, 1946. While we were discussing Pervitin, we never discussed how it was taken. Enter Panzerchocolate, or tanker's chocolate. These were chocolate bars mixed with Pervitin, which were then given out to tankers to boost their endurance and keep them going. Now this is a myth, a legend and a ruse. There's no concrete evidence of Germans eating meth chocolate. The only mention of it comes from the book Shooting Up, A History of Drugs and Warfare by Lucas Kamienski. So it's possible he heard a rumor of the tanker's chocolate and included it in his book without verifying his source. Axis Sally is a blanket term that refers to women radio personalities who were broadcasting Axis propaganda to English-speaking soldiers. The messages would be about the power of surrendering and how the soldiers' girlfriends and wives were back home cheating on them. The Sallies would also boast about knowing exactly where the Allied powers were hiding.
Good evening, women of America. Well, you know, as time goes on, I think of you more and more. I can't somehow seem to get you out of my head. You women in America, waiting for the one you love, waiting and weeping in the secrecy of your own room, thinking of the husband, the son, or the brother, who is being sacrificed by Franklin D. Roosevelt, perishing on the fringes of Europe.
Soldiers reported these attempts at propaganda were laughable at best, and didn't do much to ease them into surrendering. There are two known Axis Sallies, Mildred Gillers, who broadcasted for Germany, and Rita Zucca, who broadcasted for Italy. Listen folks, I don't know about you, but talking about all these whack job conspiracy theories surrounding World War II for this long almost drives a man crazy, so I'm taking a break. And my good friend and moderator of my Discord server, Penny Pincher, is going to cover the next few entries. Don't worry, he has a great voice.
We're going back to the Nanjing Massacre for this one. In December of 1937, a battalion of 3,000 Chinese soldiers were assigned to a 2-mile stretch of land around the captured city. Their main goal was to defend the Jiangqi River, which led out of Nanjing. On the evening of December 9th, Commander Li Fuxian went to bed after checking in with his soldiers. They were dug in and on high alert. However, the next day he was awoken with horrible and quite frankly disturbing news. The battalion was gone. Not dead, gone. There was no sign of a fight or any form of a struggle either. A few soldiers remained and were questioned, to which they said they had not seen any movement from the bridge and there were no sounds of combat. Two possible theories emerged. One, they abandoned their post and kept heading west, or they headed east across the bridge into Nanjing to surrender. This is unlikely, as the remaining soldiers didn't see movement and the Japanese likely would have just killed them. Now, of course, there are the crazy theories, like the idea that they may have slipped into a parallel reality or aliens abducted them, but regardless of what happened, 3,000 Chinese soldiers disappeared, and no one knows how. This is Carl M. Allen, and on October 28, 1943, he claimed to witness something strange. He was at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, and he was looking at the USS Eldridge. He claimed a green and blue glow suddenly surrounded the ship before it just disappeared. The ship was later seen in the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, which is about 6 hours away, before suddenly reappearing in Philly. Carl also states that sailors aboard the ship were affected heavily. Some went insane, others developed mental illnesses, but some faced a fate worse than death. During teleportation, they were fused with the ship's metal. They were still alive, but they were trapped literally within the ship. But how did he know all of this? Well, he claimed to be a student of Albert Einstein, the mastermind behind the Philadelphia experiment. Carl soon reached out to fellow ufologist Morris Jessup, and he tried to encourage Jessup to cease his research into unified
A
field
vegan
theories,
and a
which was the
vegetarian
backbone
are
of the
jumping
Philadelphia
off a cliff
experiment.
to see
Soon
who hit
after
the bottom
this,
first.
Jessup received a
Who
copy of a
wins?
UFO book
vegan
he had
and a
written in a
vegetarian.
folder only marked with Happy Easter. The book
I
was
don't know.
filled with
I
annotations
don't know, who
that
wins?
seemed to be written by three different
The Society.
people.
Society.
But Carl came out later and said it was all him, and it was a prank. He later
I
retracted
don't know.
his statement. We will never know if Einstein helped
Wins.
assist the
A
United
vegan and a
States in
veg-
teleporting their destroyers, but it should be known. Carl was the
What?
A vegan and a vegetarian are jumping off a cliff to see who hit the bottom first. Who wins?
A vegan and a vegetarian.
A vegetarian, because the vegan's already dead.
I don't know. I don't know. Who wins? The Society.
Society. A vegan and a vegetarian are jumping off.
You mean the one that fucking try to push their goddamn, like, ideology on the other fucking people for no goddamn reason? And call you a piece of shit if you're not a vegan? Vegetarians are normal people, but vegans aren't.
the only person to come forward and talk about this, and the distance between Norfolk and Philly was only 2 hours.
Wait, can't Indonesians pronounce R's? I mean, L's? I mean, I know Thai people can't. You are evidence. I highly recommend playing some Golden Age, games. PS2. And I'm talking about since you have the emulator, you can play some PS2 games. That nobody knows what the fuck it is besides you. No, I don't. That's why I have asked every single fucking time. What is it? Oh my god. You mean the one day you said you stopped fucking doing because you said you didn't know what the hell you were doing? It's like, I will say it looks more like a shrimp. No, it ain't no ammonite. I can tell you that. I ain't look like that. It looks more like a shrimp, not an ammonite. Know what the hell you're? I know what you're saying, and what you're saying is wrong. Contrast? Contrast? What the hell is the goddamn thing dealing with opposite colors? What is that word? You already are. I think I did use the word contrast. It's just I was using it in a different sense. What you're talking about is saturation of colors. I'm talking about conflicting colors, which I think is termed uh, contrasting colors. I don't know if I'm using terminology correctly. I don't care. It sounds right to me.
Hours thanks to inland canals. The sun gun is another wonder weapon that was imagined by the Germans. First designed in 1929, the idea was to put a massive mirror on a satellite, send that shit into space, and design it in a way that vast amounts of sunlight could be directed towards the Earth. It was calculated that a mirror of 9 square kilometers could direct enough sunlight to boil an ocean. These were only discussions, as the scientists also thought it would take 100 years to complete. Operation Jericho was the plan to attack an Amiens prison in German-occupied France.
Why are you posting that bullshit? Bruh, how does it fucking remind you of it? Bruh. He likes his fucking, abstract shit. Next, you'll start dreaming about non-Euclidean geometry and seeing weird colors that are not of this world. And tentacles. And fish people.
There. Many prisoners were already murdered by the German guards, and the rest pretty much accepted their fates. However, on February 18th, 1944, Allied bombings hit the castle. Of the 717 prisoners there, 102 were killed immediately, 74 were wounded, and 258 of them escaped. However, 2/3 of the escapees were later recaptured, meaning roughly 170 of the 717 prisoners were freed. So, all in all, this was a failure and an unnecessary idea. Whoever planned this thing should have been fired, but there's the issue. Who did plan this thing? The French prisoners who escaped were questioned, and they had no knowledge of the attack before it happened. The remaining French resistance members were also questioned, and once again, they had no idea of any of this. The answer of who ordered the attack in Operation Jericho has been lost to history.
Alright, I'm back. Doesn't he have such a nice voice? Anyways, Portrait of a Young Man was an oil painting done by Raphael in the 16th century. The painting was in Poland, and after the German invasion, it was moved from the Czartoryski Museum to a house in Sinaloa, along with other artworks. However, the paintings were discovered by the Gestapo and Hans Frank, the person in control of Poland after the invasion. The paintings were shipped to Berlin to join the Germans' ever-growing collection of stolen treasure and art. In January of 1945, Frank Hess took the painting for his own personal use at the Warwick Castle. This is the last time the Portrait of the Young Man was spotted. Frank Hess was arrested in May of 1945, and he had his house ransacked, where several stolen pieces of artwork were recovered, but Portrait of a Young Man was nowhere to be seen. Today, it's considered one of the most important and most valuable missing artworks from World War II. Pete Ellis was a part of the United States Marine Corps, and he wrote the plans that the United States used to defeat Japan. The thing is, he wrote them 20 years before Pearl Harbor happened. Pete served in World War I, where he wrote several reports with strategies the Marine Corps could use during battles. After World War I ended, Ellis was summoned to the Marine headquarters when he began to write Operations Plan 7112-H, Advanced Base Operations in Micronesia. It rolls right off the tongue. The report prophesizes a war with Japan, and he put in strategies on how to win it. The book has some eerily similar passages in it, like this one. Considering our consistent policy of non-aggression, Japan will probably initiate the war, which will indicate that, in Japan's mind, she believes that, considering her own defensive position, she has sufficient military strength to defeat our fleet. Continuing on, Ellis details how the Marines should go from island to island in the Pacific to establish ground and dominance as they grow closer towards the Japanese mainland. Pete also talked about how weak and vulnerable Guam was, as the territory belonged to the United States, but there was no military presence there. Now, all of this should sound familiar, as it's exactly what happened. Japan struck first, and they took over Guam mere days after this, and America began island hopping to grow closer towards the Japanese mainland. And keep in mind, Pete wrote this 20 years before any of this happened. For the next 2 years, Ellis traveled the Pacific, surveying many of the islands he wrote about in his report. He spent some time in Japan before traveling to Palau, and all throughout this, he drank heavily, and he revealed secrets of his missions to the locals. While staying on Palau, he was given 2 bottles of whiskey from Japanese police officers, and he died that same day. So did Pete Ellis accurately predict Japan's invasion plans and he paid the price for it, or did he kill himself through his own vices? Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish architect who was responsible for saving thousands of Jewish people in German-occupied Hungary. He did this by giving the populace jobs while providing protective documents and security details. In February of 1945, Soviet forces liberated Budapest, and Raoul's mission was over. Or so he thought. He was detained and arrested by the Red Army, and that was the last time he was ever spotted. The Soviets have a history of paranoia, and this may have been the reason for his arrest. Raoul Wallenberg was recruited by Ivar Olsen, an American agent who was a part of the Office of Strategic Services, which was the forerunner to the CIA. This convinced the Soviets he was a double agent, prompting his arrest. Now, Sweden didn't really care at first. They were more concerned with keeping Russia as an ally instead of asking them about this one person. It wasn't until 1946, under pressure from the Swedish public and the Foreign Office, that the Swedish minister requested an interview with Joseph Stalin to discuss Wallenberg. Though there was evidence of him being imprisoned in Moscow, Stalin straight up said he was dead, and that was the story for 11 years. Once Stalin died, some of the truth started coming out. Russia admitted that Wallenberg survived the war and was a prisoner at the time of the 1946 meeting. But then they claimed that Wallenberg, who had no prior health problems, had died in the prison of a heart attack 2 years later. In 2016, he was officially declared dead, but his true fate remains a mystery. Hermann Göring was one of the highest-ranked Germans in World War.
Which friend? Which friend? Okay, don't answer me. Okay. You know, have you had any dreams recently concerning non-Euclidean geometry, squids, or fish people, or oceans? Anything about... Well, this one is 2.5 hours long.
That's all you need to know. Once we have the Chancellor, devices will lead you to the rendezvous point. Any questions? Now for our... disguises. Everyone step back. This will get us into the inner circle. Step into the shadow hologram and you will receive your new identity. When you leave here, you'll have no communication with the rest of the team. All right then, get to your positions.
Well handled. I should have put you in charge long ago. A word of advice, though. Keep an eye on Hardin. There's something about him I do not trust.
Don't worry. I'm keeping my eye on all of them.
Greetings, Your Majesty.
Welcome home, Chancellor. I'm thankful to the Jedi for bringing you here safely.
Yes, Senator. It is good to be back. Although I think the amount of security that has accompanied me is overkill.
With all due respect, Chancellor, where your safety is concerned, there is no such thing as overkill.
So you keep insisting, Master Jedi, but I've grown tired of discussing it.
Anakin, Ahsoka,
Wait, have you played Republic Commando? You should. Eh. I don't blame you. It's kind of a little bit of rough gameplay and mechanics. It won't hurt to try it though. The last time I played it was on PS2 when my dad decided to take me to work with him when he worked at Fort Campbell back in like 2008 or 9. It has a 10 out of 10 on Steam. Oh boy. Republic Commando. How often do you see a fucking 10 out of 10? I don't believe it either. Never. What? Which SpongeBob game? Oh yeah, that game. Oh, that's. I also recommend that game. Out of all, out of. I don't know. It came out around the same time, I think. You should save your work.
Welcome to the festival. I've never seen the Festival of Light. Sounds like a big event.
They're expecting a large crowd, which means it will be difficult for Dooku to attack during the ceremony. That leaves the palace as the best opportunity for an ambush.
Are you that certain an attack is imminent?
I'm afraid so. Which is why I'm making Ahsoka your personal bodyguard.
At your service, my lady.
That shouldn't affect your ability to fucking save.